A man with no degree, worn-out clothes, walks into an interview at a top consulting firm and gets kicked out after 5 minutes. But the moment he turns to leave, a $20 million project collapses right before everyone's eyes. The thing nobody expected? He spotted the mistake that an entire team of experts had missed for months. From being dismissed and looked down upon, he's given 72 hours to save everything, or lose it all. This is the story of a single father who rewrote his destiny with talent and unshakable determination. Watch until the end, hit like, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like insects trapped in glass. Ethan Cole sat in the waiting area of Meridian Strategic Consulting, trying not to look at the other candidates. They all had the same look: polished shoes, tailored suits, leather portfolios that probably cost more than his rent. He glanced down at his own clothes. The khakis were clean but faded at the knees. The button-down shirt was pressed, though the collar was starting to fray. He'd borrowed the blazer from his neighbor, and it pulled tight across his shoulders. His daughter's face flashed through his mind. Mia, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, asking him that morning if they could finally go to the zoo this weekend. He'd promised her. Again. Like he'd promised her the last 3 weekends when overtime at the warehouse had eaten up their plans. "This is stupid," he muttered under his breath. The receptionist glanced up, perfectly arched eyebrows rising slightly. Ethan looked away. He shouldn't be here. The job posting had been a mistake. He'd clicked on it while scrolling through listings at 2 in the morning, exhausted after a double shift. Data analyst position, Meridian Strategic Consulting. He'd read the requirements. Bachelor's degree preferred, master's a plus, experience with advanced statistical modeling, proficiency in multiple programming languages. He had none of that. Not on paper, anyway. But he'd taught himself Python while Mia slept. He'd learned SQL by working through free online courses during his lunch breaks. He'd built predictive models for his own curiosity, testing them against sports statistics, stock patterns, anything he could find data for. Numbers made sense to him in a way that formal education never had. He dropped out of community college when Mia's mother left, when keeping a roof over their heads became more important than theoretical knowledge. The application had been an impulse. The callback had been a shock. "Mr. Cole?" A woman in a charcoal suit stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. She was maybe 30, with sharp features and sharper eyes that swept over him with the efficiency of a scanner. "That's me." Ethan stood, wiping his palms on his thighs before catching himself. "I'm Jennifer Park, HR coordinator. Please follow me." The hallway was all glass and steel, the kind of modern design that was supposed to feel open but instead felt exposed. Through the windows, he could see into conference rooms where serious-looking people gestured at screens filled with charts and projections. Everyone moved with purpose here, like they belonged. Jennifer led him to a room at the end of the hall. Inside, 3 people sat behind a long table. The setup reminded Ethan of a tribunal. "Please, sit." The man in the center gestured to a lone chair facing them. He was in his 50s, silver hair precisely parted, a watch on his wrist that could probably pay off Ethan's credit card debt. "I'm Richard Voss, senior partner. This is Dr. Angela Chen, our head of analytics, and Marcus Webb, project director." Ethan shook each of their hands. Dr. Chen's grip was perfunctory. Marcus barely made contact. "So," Richard began, flipping open a folder. "Ethan Cole, no college degree, currently employed at Peterson Logistics as a warehouse coordinator." He said it like he was reading ingredients off a cereal box. "Yes, sir. I coordinate inventory management and you applied for a data analyst position at a firm that consults for Fortune 500 companies." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Help me understand your thinking here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I saw the job posting. I meet the technical requirements." "The technical requirements." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her voice clinical. "You're familiar with multivariate regression analysis, Bayesian inference, machine learning algorithms?" "I've worked with all of those. I know Python, R, SQL. I've built models for—" "Where?" Marcus cut in. His tone carried an edge of amusement. "At the warehouse? What are you modeling? Forklift routes?" Light laughter rippled through the room. Ethan felt heat crawl up his neck. I model predictive patterns in my free time. I've created algorithms that, in your free time, Richard closed the folder. Mr. Cole, I appreciate your initiative, but this isn't a hobby position. We're talking about multi-million-dollar client portfolios, strategic forecasting that affects thousands of jobs. We need people with credentials, with proven track records in professional settings. I understand that, but do you? Dr. Chen's voice cut like a scalpel. Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a fundamental misunderstanding of what we do here. This isn't an entry-level position for someone looking to break into the field. We're not a training program. Ethan's hands curled into fists under the table. I'm not asking for training. I'm telling you I can do the work. Based on what evidence? Marcus spread his hands. YouTube tutorials? Online certificates anyone can print out? Based on results. If you'd look at the portfolio samples I submitted. We did look. Richard's voice carried a note of finality. They're impressive for an amateur. But amateur is the key word here. Mr. Cole, I think there's been a miscommunication. This interview was a courtesy, quite frankly. When HR flagged your application, I assumed there had been some kind of clerical error. The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. So this was never real, he said quietly. You were never going to actually consider me. It's not personal, Doctor, Chen said, though her tone suggested it absolutely was. It's about standards, about maintaining the reputation that Meridian has built over 2 decades. We can't risk that on someone who, frankly, doesn't meet the basic qualifications. Ethan stood. The chair scraped against the floor, too loud in the suddenly silent room. Thank you for your time, he managed, his voice flat. Mr. Cole, Richard began, something that might have been sympathy crossing his features. No, I get it. I'm not what you're looking for. Ethan turned toward the door. I'll see myself out. He was 3 steps into the hallway when the shouting started. At first, it was just raised voices from somewhere down the corridor. Then it became clearer, panic, sharp and unmistakable. Ethan paused, completely collapsed. I'm telling you, the whole model just... That's impossible. We ran diagnostics yesterday. Well, it's very possible because the client is on the phone right now and the projections are showing a 90% deviation from... A door slammed open. A young man in a loosened tie practically ran past Ethan, his face pale. Behind him, the shouting intensified. Richard appeared in the doorway of the interview room, his phone pressed to his ear. What do you mean the Morrison account is failing? That's our flagship project. Ethan should have kept walking, should have gotten to the elevator, back to his car, back to his life where he understood his place. But something in the panic called to the part of him that couldn't leave a puzzle unsolved. He moved toward the commotion. The conference room at the center of the floor was chaos. At least a dozen people clustered around a massive screen displaying what looked like a data dashboard. Numbers cascaded down in red. Charts jerked and spiked. A ticker at the bottom showed a single phrase in capital letters: critical model failure. How did this happen? A woman stood at the head of the table, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. She was maybe 40, dark hair pulled back severely, wearing a navy suit that looked like it cost more than Ethan's car. Her presence commanded the room in a way that made everyone else seem like supporting players. Ms. Grant, we're trying to trace the error back, but I don't need excuses. I need solutions. Morrison Chemical is our largest client. This model has been running for 6 months. 6 months? And now you're telling me it's been calculating their market projections incorrectly the entire time? Ethan found himself staring at the screen. Even from the doorway, he could see the patterns. The way the data jumped and stuttered, the intervals at which the red spikes occurred, it was familiar, painfully familiar. It's the lag coefficient, he said aloud. The room went silent. Every head turned toward him. The woman, Ms. Grant, fixed him with a stare that could freeze blood. Excuse me? The lag coefficient in your time series model. Ethan stepped into the room, his heart hammering. Your data points aren't accounting for temporal autocorrelation. That's why you're getting those spikes at regular intervals. The model thinks each data point is independent when they're actually serially dependent. Dr. Chen appeared beside him, her face flushed. Mr. Cole, you need to leave. This is a confidential client matter. Who is this? Miss Grant demanded. A failed interview candidate. He was just leaving. Actually, Richard said, moving to stand beside Ethan, his expression troubled. Let him speak. Ms. Grant, this is Ethan Cole. He just finished interviewing for the analyst position. Ms. Grant's eyes narrowed. You hired a new analyst in the middle of a crisis? We didn't hire him. We rejected him. Then why is he still here? Because he might be right. Richard pointed at the screen. Show me what you're seeing. Ethan approached the display. Up close, the model was even more flawed than he'd thought. Your baseline assumption is treating each quarter as an independent variable, but market behavior carries forward. What happened in Q1 affects Q2, which affects Q3. You need to integrate an autoregressive component. We did integrate that, one of the analysts protested. We used AR1. First-order autoregression isn't enough for this kind of data. You need at least AR3, maybe AR4, and you're missing the moving average component entirely. This should be an ARIMA model, not simple linear regression. Dr. Chen let out a sharp laugh. That's absurd. We have 5 PhDs on this team. Are you seriously suggesting we don't know the difference between linear regression and time series analysis? I'm suggesting you made an assumption 6 months ago and never questioned it. Ethan turned to face her. You built a beautiful model, complex, sophisticated, but you built it on a flawed foundation. This is ridiculous, Marcus said. Ms. Grant, this man is nobody. He works in a warehouse. He has no credentials, no training. But does he have a point? Ms. Grant's voice cut through the argument. She was studying the screen now, her expression unreadable. Dr. Chen, could he be right? Dr. Chen's professional mask flickered. It's theoretically possible that we oversimplified the temporal component, but show me. Ms. Grant pointed at Ethan. You, show me exactly what you think we did wrong. Ethan moved to the computer terminal. His hands shook slightly as he pulled up the model's code. The room watched in silence as he scrolled through hundreds of lines, his eyes scanning for the structural flaw he knew had to be there. There, he pointed at a block of code. This is where you're defining the predictive function. You're using ordinary least squares regression with quarterly dummy variables. But you're not accounting for the fact that chemical markets are cyclical. They don't reset every quarter. They flow. He pulled up a blank coding window and started typing. If you restructure it like this, add the autoregressive terms, integrate a moving average for market volatility, and adjust for seasonality, you get a model that actually captures the underlying behavior. The code flew from his fingers. It wasn't elegant, wasn't refined, but it was right. He could feel it. Wait, Dr. Chen leaned over his shoulder. That's not terrible. Not terrible? Another analyst spoke up. That's a complete model redesign. We can't just implement that on the fly. We don't have a choice, Ms. Grant said quietly. She was staring at Ethan now with an intensity that made him want to step back. Morrison Chemical is supposed to present our market analysis to their board tomorrow morning. If we show them these failed projections, we lose the account. $20 million. $20 million? Ethan's voice came out strangled. That's the contract value. Ms. Grant's expression was granite. And that's not counting the damage to our reputation if word gets out that our flagship model was fundamentally broken for half a year. Ms. Grant, Richard said carefully, we can't seriously be considering letting a random candidate rebuild our most important client model. Why not? She turned to face the room. Our credentialed experts built a model that failed catastrophically. This random candidate identified the problem in 30 seconds. I'm running out of options, Richard. He could be completely wrong. We could make things worse. Show me worse than a 90% deviation. Ms. Grant's voice was ice. She looked at Ethan. Can you fix this? Every rational part of Ethan's brain screamed at him to say no, to walk away from this disaster, go home to Mia, keep his head down. But he looked at that screen, at the broken patterns, and he knew exactly what needed to happen. Yes, he heard himself say, but I'll need access to the full data set and your modeling software. Absolutely not, Dr. Chen said. That's proprietary client information. We can't just hand it over to... You have a better idea? Ms. Grant didn't look away from Ethan. Because I'm listening. Silence. Here's what's going to happen. Ms. Grant's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Mr. Cole, you have 10 minutes to prove your concept works. You'll use a sample of the Morrison data, enough to demonstrate validity, but not enough to compromise full confidentiality. Dr. Chen set him up on a sandbox terminal. Ms. Grant, now. Dr. Chen's jaw worked, but she moved to a computer terminal in the corner. Her fingers flew over the keyboard with barely suppressed anger. Ethan followed her. The terminal booted up, showing a limited data set, quarterly chemical market data going back 5 years. 10 minutes, Dr. Chen said coldly. Starting now. Ethan sat down. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second, then he dove in. The first step was data pre-processing. He pulled the quarterly figures, identified the variables, market price, production volume, competitor activity, regulatory changes. The data set was cleaner than he expected, which meant the problem really was in the modeling approach, not data quality. He started building the ARIMA structure, first-order differencing to make the series stationary. Then the autoregressive component. He tested AR3 and AR4, comparing the autocorrelation functions. AR4 fit better. 5 minutes, someone called out. Sweat beaded on Ethan's forehead. The moving average component was trickier. He needed to capture the volatility in market reactions without overfitting. Too many parameters and the model would be useless for predictions. Too few, and it would miss critical patterns. He coded the MA2 component, then ran a quick diagnostic. The residuals looked random. Good. The information criteria were lower than the original model. Better. 2 minutes. The seasonality adjustment was the final piece. Chemical markets had annual cycles, driven by agricultural seasons and manufacturing schedules. He added the seasonal terms, calibrated the period to 12 months. Time, Dr. Chen said. Hold on. Time, Mr. Cole. Ethan hit execute. The model compiled. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen populated with new projections. The room leaned in collectively. Instead of wild red spikes, the projection showed a smooth curve with reasonable confidence intervals. The backtesting showed the model accurately predicted the last year of known data with less than 5% deviation. The forward projection aligned with industry trends and economic indicators. I'll be damned, Richard breathed. Doctor. Chen stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed her. This is preliminary. It needs validation, peer review, stress testing. It works. Ms. Grant's voice was quiet, but it silenced the room. She turned to Ethan. How long to build the full model? Ethan's mind raced. With complete access to the data and your software suite, maybe 72 hours? 3 days, working around the clock. The client presentation is in 36 hours. His stomach dropped. That's not enough time to... I didn't ask if it was enough time. I asked how long you need. You just said 3 days. Ms. Grant's eyes were hard. So here's my offer. You have 72 hours to rebuild this model from the ground up. Full access, complete data, whatever resources you need. If you deliver a working model that satisfies Morrison's board, you get the analyst's job, salary, benefits, the whole package. And if I can't, then you walk away and we never speak of this again. Yes, she extended her hand. Do we have a deal? Ethan looked at that hand, at the room full of hostile faces, at the screen showing his quick model that proved he could do this. He thought about Mia, about the zoo, about every door that had been slammed in his face because he didn't have the right piece of paper. He shook Ms. Grant's hand. Deal. The conference room they gave him was smaller than the main one, but it had everything he needed. 3 monitors, access to Meridian's full software suite, and a direct line to the Morrison chemical database. Dr. Chen spent 20 minutes walking him through the security protocols with barely concealed resentment. These credentials are temporary, she said, writing down a string of access codes. They expire in exactly 72 hours. Don't lose them. I won't. And everything you do is logged. Every query, every model iteration, every file you open, we'll be watching. I'd expect nothing less. She studied him for a long moment. You're in over your head. You know that, right? Ethan met her gaze. Probably. This isn't some online tutorial where you can pause the video and look up answers. This is real money, real consequences. People's careers are on the line. I'm aware. Are you? Dr. Chen's voice dropped lower. Because if you fail, when you fail, it won't just be your rejection. It'll be a reminder to everyone here that we compromised our standards in a moment of panic, that we let someone unqualified touch our most important project. Then I'd better not fail. She left without another word. Ethan sat in the sudden silence, staring at the 3 blank monitors. The weight of what he'd agreed to settled over him like a physical thing. 72 hours to do what a team of PhDs had spent 6 months building. He pulled out his phone. Mia's daycare number was on speed dial. Bright Futures Daycare, this is Stacy. Hey Stacy, it's Ethan Cole. I need to ask a huge favor. 30 minutes later, his neighbor Mrs. Chen, no relation to Dr. Angela Chen, thank God, agreed to pick up Mia from daycare and keep her for the next few days. She'd done it before during his warehouse overtime shifts, but never for this long.
You're sure everything's okay? Mrs. Chen's concern carried through the phone. Everything's fine. This is for work, a big opportunity. The warehouse is giving you a promotion? Something like that. I'll explain when I pick her up. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Really. You're a good father, Ethan. Mia's lucky to have you. Don't work yourself to death, okay? He ended the call and stared at the monitors again. Time to begin.
The Morrison Chemical dataset was massive. 15 years of quarterly data across 12 different product lines, incorporating hundreds of variables, market prices, production costs, regulatory changes, competitor analysis, macroeconomic indicators, even weather patterns that affected agricultural chemical demand. It was beautiful in its complexity and completely overwhelming. Ethan started with the foundation, the same approach he'd used in the demonstration but scaled up. ARIMA modeling for each product line, then integration across the portfolio. But as he dug deeper, he realized the problem was more nuanced than he'd initially thought. Chemical markets weren't just cyclical, they were reactive. A regulatory change in Europe could cascade through to affect production decisions in Asia 6 months later. A drought in the Midwest could shift fertilizer demand in ways that rippled through the entire market. He needed more than time series analysis. He needed a dynamic systems model. The first 8 hours disappeared in a blur of coding and testing. Ethan built the core structure, defining the relationships between variables, mapping the feedback loops. The model started to take shape, not elegant yet, but functional. Around 2 a.m., his vision started to blur. He stood up, stretched, and realized the building was nearly empty. Through the glass walls, he could see a few lights in distant offices, other people working late, but his floor was dark except for his conference room. The isolation was oddly comforting. He grabbed coffee from the break room, expensive stuff, the kind that came from individual pods instead of a bulk pot. It tasted like burnt regret, but the caffeine helped. Back at the terminal, he ran into his first major problem. The model was producing reasonable results for 11 of the 12 product lines. But the agricultural chemicals division kept showing nonsensical projections, massive spikes and crashes that didn't align with any historical pattern. He spent 2 hours trying to debug it, checked the data quality, verified the variable relationships, adjusted the parameters. Nothing worked. At 4 a.m., he finally found the issue. There was a subtle correlation between regulatory approval timelines and market entry for new agricultural products. The original model had missed it entirely because the lag time was irregular, sometimes 3 months, sometimes 18. You couldn't capture that with a standard time series approach. Ethan built a discrete event model, simulating the regulatory pipeline as a separate process that fed into the market projections. It was inelegant, a kludge that bolted 2 different modeling approaches together. But when he ran the backtest, the projections aligned with historical data. The sky was beginning to lighten when he finally crashed on the conference room couch. He'd meant to close his eyes for just a few minutes. When he opened them again, sunlight streamed through the windows, and his phone showed 11:30 a.m. He'd slept for 4 hours. Panic jolted him awake. He had less than 60 hours left. The office was fully populated now, people moving through the corridors with purpose and coffee cups. Ethan splashed water on his face in the bathroom, trying to look less like a zombie. His reflection showed a man who desperately needed a shower and a shave. He passed Dr. Chen in the hallway. She looked at him with barely disguised contempt, but said nothing. Back in the conference room, Ethan dove into the next phase, validation and stress testing. The model needed to work not just on historical data, but on hypothetical scenarios. What if there was a sudden regulatory crackdown? What if a major competitor launched a disruptive product? What if a global recession hit? He built scenario engines, probabilistic simulations that tested the model under different conditions. Most of them worked. Some didn't. He refined and adjusted, chasing down edge cases and anomalies. Around 3 p.m., someone knocked on his door. Richard Voss entered, carrying 2 sandwiches and a bottle of water. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting them on the table. Ethan's stomach growled in response. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "Thanks." Richard sat down across from him. "How's it going?" "Honestly, I have no idea. The model is functioning, but I won't know if it's actually accurate until we get real-world validation. That's what the presentation is for." Richard studied him carefully. "You know, when we rejected your application, I thought we were doing the right thing. And now? Now I think we might have been idiots." He gestured at the monitors. "What you're doing here, this isn't beginner work. This is advanced systems modeling. Where did you learn this?" Ethan took a bite of the sandwich. Turkey and Swiss probably cost $15. Necessity. When you're trying to predict inventory needs for a warehouse without sophisticated software, you learn to build your own tools. Warehouse inventory is a far cry from multi-million-dollar chemical market projections. Not really. It's all just patterns and probabilities. The stakes are different, but the math is the same. Richard shook his head slowly. "You know what the difference is between you and most of our analysts? They learned modeling from textbooks and professors. You learned it from problems that actually mattered. There's a clarity to that. That clarity doesn't come with a diploma." "No, but maybe it should count for more than it does." Richard stood. "I meant what I said before. If you pull this off, you have a job here. But even if you don't, I'm going to make sure HR knows we need to rethink our hiring criteria." He left Ethan alone with the sandwiches and a strange warmth in his chest that felt dangerously close to hope. The second night was harder than the first. Exhaustion clung to Ethan like a physical weight, making every line of code feel like pushing a boulder uphill. His eyes burned. His back ached from hours hunched over the keyboard. His thoughts started to fragment, losing coherence. Around midnight, he caught himself staring at a screen of numbers that had stopped making sense. The variables blurred together. He couldn't remember what he'd been trying to solve. He stood up too fast and the room tilted. When had he last slept? Really slept, not just collapsed for a few hours? His phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Chen. "Mia is asking about the zoo. Should I tell her this weekend?" Ethan stared at the message. The zoo, he'd promised. Again. "Not this weekend," he typed back. "Soon. I promise." The guilt was acid in his throat. He was doing this for her, for their future, for the chance at a better life. But in the moment, it just felt like another broken promise. He forced himself back to the computer. The model was mostly complete now. The core structure was solid, the validation tests were passing, but there was still something wrong, something he couldn't quite identify. The projections were good, but not great. They'd satisfy the client, probably. But they weren't exceptional. And if Ethan had learned anything in his life, it was that good enough was never actually enough. Not when you were fighting from the bottom. He dug into the data again, looking for the missing piece. There had to be something, some variable, some relationship that would elevate the model from functional to powerful. At 3 a.m., he found it buried in the metadata. Morrison Chemical had research and development spending figures that weren't included in the original model. R&D investment was a leading indicator for new product launches, which drove market expansion. The original team had ignored it, probably because R&D data was noisy and hard to model. But Ethan had spent years working with imperfect data, finding signals in noise. He built a new component, a machine learning algorithm that predicted R&D effectiveness based on historical patterns. It was risky. ML models were black boxes, hard to explain to clients who wanted clear causation. But when he integrated it with the time series projections, the accuracy jumped by another 8%. The model was no longer just good. It was exceptional. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a ragged laugh escaping his lips. He'd done it. Against every odd, every voice telling him he wasn't qualified, he'd built something that actually worked. Then his computer screen went black. For a moment, he thought his exhausted eyes were playing tricks. But no. All 3 monitors were dead. The tower lights were off. Complete shutdown. No. Ethan's voice was small in the silent room. No, no, no. He jabbed the power button. Nothing. He checked the power cables, all connected. The outlet showed a green light. Everything should be working, but the computer was dead, and with it, 17 hours of work since his last backup. His hand shook as he pulled out his phone, searching for IT support numbers. The office was empty at 3 a.m., but there had to be emergency tech support. The automated system put him through to a sleepy-sounding technician who promised someone would be there within the hour. Ethan sat in the dark conference room, staring at the black screens, and felt the last of his confidence drain away. He'd been so focused on the model that he hadn't followed basic protocol, hadn't backed up regularly, hadn't protected his work. Stupid. Amateur. All the things they'd called him, he'd just proven right. The door opened. Ms. Grant stood in the doorway, still in a full suit despite the hour. I saw the security alert that your terminal went down, she said. What happened? I don't know. It just died. I had the full model almost complete, and His voice cracked. I didn't back it up frequently enough. If the drive is corrupted, I've lost... How much time do you have left? Ethan checked his phone. 38 hours. Ms. Grant moved to the computer tower, examining it with a clinical eye. This is a hardware failure, not a data loss. The IT team will recover your work. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because this is a professional environment with redundant backup systems and disaster recovery protocols. She turned to face him. Your work is saved, but you need to sleep. I can't. I need to... You need to be functional when the presentation happens. Right now, you're running on fumes. Her voice softened fractionally. Mr. Cole, I've been in this business for 15 years. I've seen brilliant people burn themselves out trying to prove something. Don't be one of them. I have to prove something. That's the whole point. No. The point is to deliver a working model. Everything else is ego. She walked to the door, then paused. There's a hotel 2 blocks from here. Meridian has a corporate account. Go sleep in a real bed for 6 hours. Your model will be waiting when you get back. She left before he could argue. Ethan sat alone in the dark room for another 5 minutes, wrestling with the impulse to stay, to keep working. But she was right. He could feel his mind slipping, losing the sharpness he needed. The hotel room was nicer than anywhere he'd stayed in years. Ethan collapsed on the bed fully clothed and was asleep before his head hit the pillow. He woke 6 hours later feeling almost human. A shower, a change of clothes from the overnight bag he'd grabbed from his car, and 2 cups of hotel coffee brought him back to something approaching functional. When he returned to Meridian, the IT team had his terminal running. The data was intact, all of it. Motherboard overheated, the technician explained. We swapped it out. You're good to go. Ethan could have kissed him. The final 30 hours became a sprint. He refined the model, tested edge cases, built presentation-ready visualizations. The projections were clean now, the methodology solid. He prepared documentation explaining the approach, the assumptions, the confidence intervals. By hour 68, he had something he was proud of. Something that wasn't just functional, but genuinely innovative. A hybrid model that combined classical time series analysis with machine learning prediction, dynamic systems thinking with scenario planning. He ran the final validation at hour 70. The model predicted historical data with 94% accuracy and generated forward projections with reasonable confidence bands. It accounted for regulatory changes, market competition, R&D impact, and macroeconomic factors. It was ready. At hour 72 exactly, Dr. Chen appeared in his doorway. Time's up, she said. There was something in her expression, not quite respect, but no longer pure contempt. Ms. Grant wants to see the model. Ethan saved his final version, backed it up 3 separate ways, and followed her to the main conference room. The room was full. Ms. Grant sat at the head of the table. Richard was there, along with Marcus and at least 8 other people Ethan didn't recognize. All of them watched him with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. Mr. Cole, Ms. Grant said, show us what you have. Ethan connected his laptop to the main display. His hands were steady now, the exhaustion pushed aside by focus. The original Morrison model failed because it treated market behavior as a linear sequence of independent events, he began. But chemical markets are complex adaptive systems. Everything affects everything else, often with unpredictable lag times. He pulled up the first slide, showing the old model's structure. This is what you built, clean, elegant, based on sound statistical principles. But it missed the feedback loops, the way regulatory changes influence R&D spending, which influences product launches, which influences market competition, which loops back to affect pricing and production decisions. The next slide showed his new architecture. So I rebuilt it from the ground up. The core is an ARIMA model, autoregressive integrated moving average, which captures the temporal dependencies in market pricing. But I layered on machine learning for R&D effectiveness prediction, discrete event modeling for regulatory timelines, and scenario engines for stress testing. He walked them through each component, explaining the methodology, showing the validation results. When he pulled up the backtest comparison, 94% accuracy versus the old model's 67%. Someone in the room let out a low whistle. The forward projections show Morrison maintaining market share in 9 of 12 product lines, with opportunities for growth in specialty agricultural chemicals and industrial polymers. Ethan advanced to the final slide. Confidence intervals are tight, scenario testing is robust, and the model updates dynamically as new data comes in. Silence filled the room. Finally, Ms. Grant spoke. Questions? Dr. Chen leaned forward. The machine learning component. How do you explain the causal mechanisms to the client? They're going to want to understand why the model makes specific predictions. I built an interpretation layer, Ethan said, pulling up a new screen. The ML algorithm identifies patterns, but I mapped those patterns back to observable factors, patent filings, hiring trends in R&D departments, collaboration announcements. The client can see the logic chain. What about model degradation? Marcus asked. ML algorithms can drift over time as market conditions change. I included a recalibration protocol that triggers automatically when prediction error exceeds 5%. The model essentially rebuilds itself every quarter using updated data. The questions continued for 20 minutes. Ethan answered each one, sometimes pulling up additional documentation, sometimes admitting uncertainty. But the core model held up under scrutiny. When the questions finally stopped, Ms. Grant stood. The Morrison presentation is tomorrow morning at 9. Mr. Cole, you'll be presenting this model to their board of directors. Dr. Chen, I want you there as technical backup. Richard, you'll handle the business side. She looked directly at Ethan. This is your one chance. Don't waste it. I won't. As the room emptied, Richard caught Ethan's arm. That was impressive, really impressive. But tomorrow is going to be different. These are C-suite executives who've been burned by the failed model. They're going to be hostile. I can handle hostiles, and can you? Because these people won't just question your methodology. They'll question your credentials, your experience, your right to be in the room. It's going to be personal. Ethan thought about the interview 3 days ago, about every door slammed in his face, every opportunity denied because he didn't have the right background. Yeah, he said quietly. I can handle it. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through every possible scenario for the morning presentation. What if they hated it? What if he'd missed something critical? What if his explanations weren't polished enough, professional enough? What if they saw right through him? He checked his phone. 2:47 a.m. A text from Mrs. Chen showed a photo of Mia asleep on her couch, clutching her stuffed elephant. The caption read, "She's fine. Stop worrying and get some rest." Ethan typed back, "Thank you. I'll pick her up tomorrow after the presentation." "Good luck," Mrs. Chen replied. "You've got this." He wanted to believe that. He set an alarm for 6 a.m. and forced his eyes closed, but sleep felt like trying to grab smoke. When the alarm finally went off, he'd managed maybe 2 hours of fractured rest. The shower helped. So did the suit that Richard had sent to his hotel room the night before, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a note that said, "You'll need armor for this battle." Ethan stared at himself in the mirror. The suit fit better than anything he'd ever worn. He looked like someone who belonged in that conference room. Almost. The reflection staring back at him still had the same worn edges, the same exhaustion around the eyes. You could dress up desperation, but you couldn't hide it completely. He arrived at Meridian at 7:30 a.m. The office was already buzzing with activity, people moving with the urgent purpose of a place where money never slept. Dr. Chen was in the conference room reviewing the presentation slides on her laptop. "You're early," she said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep." Neither could I. She finally met his gaze. "I've been going over your model all night. The methodology is sound. Better than sound, actually. But that doesn't mean Morrison will see it that way." "What do you mean?" Dr. Chen closed her laptop. "You have to understand something about clients at this level. They don't just buy analysis. They buy confidence. They need to believe that the person delivering the model is someone they can trust with their company's future." "And you don't think they'll trust me?" "I think they'll see a man with no credentials presenting a model that contradicts 6 months of work from a team with multiple PhDs. They'll be looking for reasons to doubt you. So what do I do? Don't apologize for who you are. Don't try to sound like something you're not." She stood, gathering her materials. "The model speaks for itself. Let it." Richard appeared in the doorway at 8:15, looking crisp in a navy suit. The Morrison team just arrived. 5 executives, including their CEO, Thomas Morrison himself. They're not in a good mood. "Wonderful," Ethan muttered. "Miss Grant is handling the initial pleasantries. We go in at 8:45. Richard studied Ethan carefully. "You ready?" "No," Ethan thought. "Yes." "Good. Because there's something you should know. Morrison threatened to pull the contract last night. Completely. They found out that someone outside our core team rebuilt the model, and they're furious we didn't consult them first." Ethan's stomach dropped. "So this is already a disaster." "It's an opportunity," Richard corrected. "If you can win them over, you prove that unconventional approaches work. If you can't..." He trailed off meaningfully. Ms. Grant swept into the room at 8:40, her expression unreadable. "They're hostile, suspicious, and looking for blood. Standard client meeting." She looked at Ethan. "You're up first. 15 minutes to present the model, then questions. Don't get defensive, don't oversell, and for the love of everything, don't mention that you built this in 3 days." "Why not? Isn't that impressive?" "It's impressive or it's reckless, depending on how they choose to see it. We're going to let the results speak first." She headed for the door. "Let's go." The main conference room had been transformed. Morrison Chemicals' logo displayed on one screen, Meridian's on another. The long table was set with water glasses, notepads, and an atmosphere you could cut with a knife. 5 people sat on the Morrison side. Thomas Morrison was unmistakable. Mid-60s, steel gray hair, the kind of weathered face that came from decades of making hard decisions. Next to him sat a younger woman with sharp eyes and sharper posture, flanked by 3 men in expensive suits who all wore identical expressions of barely contained irritation. "Thomas," Ms. Grant said warmly, extending her hand, "thank you for giving us this opportunity to present our revised analysis." Morrison's handshake was perfunctory. "Let's be clear, Olivia. The only reason we're here is contractual obligation. Your model cost us 3 months of strategic planning. We had to cancel a board presentation, delay a product launch, and explain to our investors why our market projections were fantasy. I understand your frustration. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like incompetence covered up with rush work." His eyes fixed on Ethan. "And who is this?" "This is Ethan Cole, the analyst who identified the flaw in our original model and developed the new projection system." The woman next to Morrison, her nameplate read Sarah Chen, CFO, leaned forward. "Analyst? I don't see him listed in any of the team profiles you sent us." "Mr. Cole is a recent addition to our team," Richard said smoothly. "How recent?" The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. 3 days, Ethan said. Every head turned toward him. "I joined the project 3 days ago when the original model failed." Silence crashed through the room. 3 days. Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. "You rebuilt a 6-month modeling project in 3 days." "I built a new model from scratch in 72 hours, yes." "And you expect us to bet our company's strategic direction on 72 hours of work?" Ethan felt the weight of every eye in the room. This was the moment. Either he folded and let the credentialed experts take over, or he owned what he'd done. Yes, he said, because those 72 hours were spent solving the actual problem instead of defending assumptions that didn't work. One of the Morrison executives, a man with a scar above his eyebrow, let out a sharp laugh. Unbelievable. You brought in an amateur to fix a professional mess. Let him present, Sarah Chen said suddenly. Her expression was curious now, predatory. I want to see what 72 hours buys you. Ethan moved to the front of the room. His hands didn't shake as he connected his laptop to the display. The first slide appeared. Clean, direct, no corporate fluff. Your market projections failed because they were built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how chemical markets behave, he began. The original model treated quarterly performance as independent events. But markets have memory. What happened 6 months ago still influences what happens today. He pulled up the comparison slide. This is the old model's architecture. Linear regression with quarterly controls. It's elegant, it's textbook, and it's wrong for your business. Wrong how? Sarah challenged. It can't account for feedback loops. When you invest in R&D, that doesn't just affect next quarter's results. It creates a cascade, patents, product development, market positioning that plays out over years. The old model couldn't see that because it wasn't designed to. He advanced to the next slide showing his new structure. So I built a hybrid model. The core is ARIMA, Autoregressive Integrated Moving Average, which captures how past market performance influences future behavior. That handles the baseline temporal dependencies. We know what ARIMA is, the executive with the scar said dismissively. Then you know it's not enough by itself. Markets aren't just about past patterns. They're reactive systems. Ethan pulled up the next component. This is where I integrated machine learning to predict R&D effectiveness. Your company spends $200 million annually on research and development. That investment has varying returns depending on market conditions, competitive pressure, and regulatory environment. The ML algorithm identifies which R&D projects are likely to succeed based on historical patterns. Morrison leaned forward slightly. You have access to our R&D data, project outcomes, spending figures, and market performance correlations going back 15 years. I didn't need proprietary research details, just the pattern of which investments generated market returns. Sarah Chen was typing notes on her tablet. What's the prediction accuracy? On historical backtesting, the R&D component correctly predicted successful product launches 87% of the time. When I integrate that with the time series projections, overall model accuracy hits 94% on known data. He showed them the validation results. The room had gone quiet in a different way now, not hostile, but intent. The third component handles regulatory impacts, Ethan continued. Chemical markets are heavily regulated. Approval timelines for new products vary from 3 months to 3 years depending on the regulatory environment and product category. I built a discrete event model that simulates the approval pipeline and feeds those projections into market entry timing. Well, that's extremely complex, one of the other Morrison executives said. His tone had shifted from dismissive to cautious. It has to be. Your business is complex. If the model was simple, it would be useless. Ethan walked them through the scenario testing, showing how the model performed under different conditions. Economic recession, regulatory crackdown, major competitor launching a disruptive product. In each case, the projections adjusted dynamically, maintaining accuracy. The final piece is the confidence intervals, he said, pulling up the projection graphs. The old model gave you single-line forecasts with no sense of uncertainty. This model shows probability distributions. You can see not just what's likely to happen, but the range of possible outcomes and their relative likelihood. He let them absorb the graphs. The projections showed Morrison maintaining strong market position in their core product lines, with growth opportunities in specialty chemicals. Questions? Ethan said. The room erupted. Sarah Chen went first. The machine learning component, what prevents it from overfitting to historical data and missing new patterns? I used cross-validation and regularization techniques. The model is tested on data it hasn't seen before, and it recalibrates quarterly using new market information, so it adapts as conditions change. The executive with the scar jumped in. What happens if there's a black swan event, something completely outside historical patterns? The model breaks, same as any predictive system. but I built in volatility bands that widen when market conditions become unstable. You'll see the uncertainty increase before accuracy fails completely. It's an early warning system. Morrison himself spoke next. You've shown us backtesting on historical data. That's interesting but not sufficient. Can this model make forward predictions we can actually verify? Ethan had been waiting for this question. Yes. The model projects that your agricultural chemicals division will see a 12% increase in demand over the next 2 quarters, driven by delayed effects from last year's drought in the Midwest. Farmers will be restocking inventory they depleted, and the timing will coincide with planting season. That's very specific, Sarah said. It's what the data shows. The drought impact is lagged because farmers initially used stored inventory. Now they're depleted and commodity prices have stabilized enough to justify restocking. The pattern matches what happened after the 2019 drought, just with different timing. Morrison exchanged glances with his CFO. We've been seeing early indications of increased agricultural demand in our sales pipeline. Nothing definitive yet, but the signals are there. The model identified those signals 3 weeks ago, Ethan said. That's the point. It sees patterns before they become obvious. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. Technical challenges, methodological concerns, practical applications. Ethan answered each one, sometimes consulting his documentation, sometimes admitting the limits of what the model could do. Through it all, he felt Dr. Chen watching him from the Meridian side of the table. She jumped in twice to provide additional technical context, but mostly she let him carry the weight. Finally, Morrison raised his hand. The room fell silent. I have one more question, he said, and I want an honest answer. Why should we trust a model built in 3 days by someone who wasn't even part of the original team? Ethan met his gaze directly. Because I didn't have 6 months to fall in love with the wrong approach. I came in with fresh eyes and no attachment to defending previous work, and because I had something to prove. What does that mean? It means I couldn't afford to fail. The original team built a model that didn't work, but they still had jobs, careers, and reputations. I had one shot, so I made sure it counted. Morrison studied him for a long moment. Where did you go to school, Mr. Cole? Here it was, the question Ethan had been dreading. I didn't finish college. I dropped out to raise my daughter when her mother left. So you have no formal training in statistical modeling or data science? Not from a university, no. Then where did you learn this? Ethan could feel Ms. Grant's tension from across the room. This was the moment where everything could collapse. I learned it because I needed to, he said. I was working in warehouse logistics, trying to optimize inventory systems with limited resources. I taught myself Python and R through online courses. I learned time series analysis because I needed to predict seasonal demand patterns. I built machine learning models because I needed to forecast supply chain disruptions. None of it was theoretical. It was all practical, solving real problems with real consequences. Warehouse logistics, the SCART executive said. That's a long way from chemical market analysis. The math is the same. The stakes are different, but the fundamental principles don't change. Whether you're predicting inventory needs or market demand, you're looking for patterns in noisy data and making probabilistic predictions about future states. Sarah Chen set down her tablet. I have a degree from MIT. 2 of my team members have PhDs from Stanford and Cambridge, and I'm looking at a model that's more sophisticated than anything we could have built internally. She looked at Morrison. I don't care where he learned it. I care that it works. Morrison drummed his fingers on the table. The sound filled the silent room like a countdown. Show me the 5-year projection, he said finally. Ethan pulled up the long-term forecast. The model showed Morrison's market share stabilizing in core products while growth came from specialty chemicals and emerging markets. Revenue projections included confidence intervals that widened as the timeline extended. This aligns with our internal strategic planning, Sarah said quietly, better than the original model ever did. The agricultural opportunity you mentioned, Morrison said. The 12% demand increase. When exactly does your model predict that will materialize? Peak demand should hit in 6 to 8 weeks, right before spring planting season. Morrison turned to one of his executives. David, what's our current production capacity in agricultural chemicals? We're at 70% capacity right now. We could scale up to 90% within a month if we had confidence in the demand. If this projection is accurate, Morrison said slowly, and we scale production now, we capture significant market share from competitors who are still operating on depleted inventory assumptions. And if it's wrong, Sarah countered, we're stuck with excess inventory and production costs. That's why we built confidence intervals, Ethan said. The model shows 82% probability of demand increase between 10% and 15%. Even at the low end, scaling production is profitable. Morrison stood. The entire room tensed. I need to discuss this with my team, he said. Privately. Give us 15 minutes. Miss Grant nodded. Of course. We'll be just outside. The Meridian team filed out into the hallway. As soon as the door closed, Richard let out a breath he'd been holding. That went better than I expected, he said. Better? Marcus looked pale. They're going to tear us apart in there. No, Dr. Chen said. She was looking at Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read. They're seriously considering it. Did you see Morrison's face when you mentioned the agricultural projection? That aligned with something they already suspected. But 3 days, Marcus insisted. How do we justify that to a client? How do we explain that we let someone with no credentials rebuild their entire strategic model? We don't explain it, Ms. Grant said. We let the results speak. If Morrison accepts this model, we've just demonstrated that Meridian can pivot faster and more effectively than any competitor. That's worth more than credentials. And if he rejects it? Then we've lost a $20 million contract and severely damaged our reputation. Ms. Grant's voice was matter-of-fact. But I don't think he will. Ethan leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the presentation was fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness. You did well in there, Dr. Chen said quietly, moving to stand beside him. The way you handled Morrison's questions about your background, that took guts. Didn't have much choice. You could have deflected. Let Richard or Miss Grant handle it. You chose honesty instead. She paused. I owe you an apology. When you first showed up, I thought you were a joke. Someone who'd gotten lucky with a single insight but had no real depth. And now? Now I think you might be the best analyst I've seen in 5 years, and I hate that I almost missed that because I was too busy checking for diplomas. The conference room door opened. Morrison stood in the doorway. We're ready, he said. The Meridian team filed back in. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. Either everything changed or he went back to the warehouse tomorrow. Morrison remained standing. Mr. Cole, that model you presented represents either brilliant analysis or spectacular overconfidence, possibly both. Yes, sir? My team has spent the last 15 minutes trying to find holes in your methodology. We couldn't. Sarah found a few areas where the confidence intervals might be overly optimistic, but the core structure is sound. He looked at Ms. Grant. Which puts us in an interesting position. We're prepared to move forward with implementation, Ms. Grant said. The model is ready for production use today. I'm sure it is, but here's our problem. 6 months ago, you delivered a model that you assured us was bulletproof. It failed catastrophically. Now you're asking us to trust a replacement built in 3 days by someone who wasn't even on your staff when this project started. I understand the concern. I'm not finished. Morrison's voice cut like steel. What I need to know is this. If we proceed with this model, if we make strategic decisions based on these projections, what happens when something goes wrong? Because something always goes wrong. Markets shift. Regulations change. Black swan events occur. Who's responsible for maintaining and adapting this model? The room went silent. Everyone looked at Ethan. I am, he said. If you accept this model, I maintain it. I update it. I take responsibility for its accuracy. You realize what you're saying. This isn't a side project. This would be your full-time focus, possibly your only focus. I understand. And when the model needs adjustment because market conditions changed overnight, you'll be the one we call at 2 a.m. Yes. Morrison turned to Ms. Grant. Is he actually an employee of Meridian, or is this still some kind of trial arrangement? Ms. Grant's expression didn't flicker. Mr. Cole has a standing offer of employment contingent on client approval of his work. If you accept this model, he joins our team as lead analyst on the Morrison account. Lead analyst. Morrison looked at Ethan again. You understand that title comes with expectations. Client meetings, strategic consultations, defending your methodology to boards and investors. Can you handle that? Ethan thought about Mia, about the zoo, about every promise he'd made and broken because he was working double shifts just to keep them afloat. I can handle it, he said. Morrison walked around the table, stopping directly in front of Ethan. He extended his hand. Then welcome to the deep end, Mr. Cole. Morrison Chemical is accepting this model and the ongoing analytical support that comes with it. The contract continues. Ethan shook his hand, trying to process what had just happened. $20 million. The contract was saved. But understand this, Morrison continued, his grip firm. We're not accepting this because we trust Meridian's reputation anymore. We're accepting it because Sarah and I believe you actually know what you're doing. That means you've got a target on your back. Every competitor, every skeptic who thinks credentials matter more than results, they'll be watching you, waiting for you to fail. I won't fail. Everyone fails eventually. The question is what you do when it happens. Morrison released his hand. Prove me right about you, and you'll have a very successful career. Prove me wrong, and you'll be the cautionary tale they teach in business schools. Understood. Morrison turned back to Ms. Grant. We'll need implementation support. I want quarterly reviews, direct access to Mr. Cole for strategic questions, and real-time model updates as market conditions change. All of that can be arranged, Ms. Grant said smoothly. Good. Sarah will handle the contract details with your team. We'll plan to reconvene in 30 days for the first quarterly review. Morrison gathered his materials. Olivia, this was not how I expected this meeting to go. I'm glad we could surprise you. Don't make a habit of it. I prefer boring competence to dramatic rescues. But there was something almost like respect in his tone. The Morrison team filed out. As soon as the door closed behind them, the Meridian side of the room exploded. Richard grabbed Ethan's hand, shaking it vigorously. You absolute maniac, you actually did it. We did it, Ethan corrected, but Richard was already pulling him into a half hug. Marcus looked shell-shocked. $20 million. We just saved $20 million. Doctor. Chen was smiling, actually smiling. The way you handled Morrison's question about credentials, I thought we were dead in the water, but you turned it into an asset. I just told the truth. That's what made it work. She turned to Ms. Grant. We need to talk about team structure. If Ethan's going to be lead analyst on Morrison, he'll need support staff, resources. Later, Ms. Grant interrupted. Her expression was controlled, but Ethan could see satisfaction beneath the professional mask. Right now, I need a word with Mr. Cole. Alone. The room cleared quickly. When it was just the two of them, Miss Grant moved to the window, looking out over the city. 72 hours ago, you were interviewing for an entry-level position, she said. Now you're the lead analyst on our flagship account. That's quite a trajectory. I'm still processing it. Good. Stay uncomfortable. The moment you get comfortable is the moment you start making mistakes. She turned to face him. But there's something you need to understand about what just happened in that room. What's that? You didn't just save a contract. You changed the power dynamic in this entire firm. Every analyst with a PhD from an elite school just watched someone without a college degree outperform them spectacularly. That makes you either an inspiration or a threat, depending on how people choose to see it. Ethan's stomach tightened. You're saying I'll have enemies here. I'm saying you already do. Marcus will smile to your face and undermine you behind your back because you exposed his inadequacy. Half the analytics team will resent that their credentials suddenly matter less. And corporate politics being what they are, some people will try to sabotage you just to prove you were a fluke. That's not exactly reassuring. It's not meant to be reassuring. It's meant to be realistic. Ms. Grant's voice softened fractionally. But here's what else is true. You have allies now. Richard believes in you. Dr. Chen respects you, which from her is basically a declaration of loyalty. And I'm willing to bet on you, which I don't do lightly. Why did you? Ethan asked. Bet on me, I mean. You could have sent me away during that interview and found another solution. Ms. Grant was quiet for a moment. Because 15 years ago, I was the person without the right credentials walking into rooms where everyone had degrees from schools I couldn't afford. I know what it's like to be dismissed before you open your mouth. And I know what it takes to prove them all wrong. She moved toward the door. Your official start date is Monday, HR will handle the paperwork. Salary is $120,000 annually, full benefits, and a performance bonus structure tied to client retention. Ethan's knees went weak. $120,000. That's the standard rate for a lead analyst position. If you think it should be higher, we can negotiate. No, that's more than fine. Good. Go home. See your daughter. Come back Monday, ready to work. Ms. Grant paused at the door. And Ethan, don't let this go to your head. You won a battle, not the war. Morrison will expect results, so will I. I won't let you down. I know, that's why I hired you. She left him alone in the conference room. Ethan sank into a chair, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was finally draining away. $120,000 a year. Lead analyst. A real career, not just survival. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Chen. How did it go? She answered immediately. I got the job. Her shriek of joy was loud enough that he had to hold the phone away from his ear. I knew it. I knew you could do it. Is Mia still awake? She's right here. Hold on. A rustling sound, then his daughter's voice came through the line. Daddy? The sound of her voice hit him like a physical force. Hey, sweetheart. How are you doing? I'm good. Mrs. Chen made pancakes. Did you finish your important work? I did, baby. I finished it. Does that mean we can go to the zoo this weekend? Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. Yes, this weekend, I promise. And this time, I mean it. Really, really? Really, really? In fact, how about we go tomorrow? Just you and me. Mia's squeal of delight made him laugh despite the exhaustion pulling at him. Can we see the elephants? And the tigers? And can I get cotton candy? We can see everything. And yes, you can get cotton candy. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Mia. More than anything in the world. I'll pick you up in an hour, okay? Okay. Mrs. Chen came back on the line. You sound exhausted. I am, but it's the good kind. Ethan stood, gathering his materials. Thank you for taking care of her. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out. You always do. Now go get your daughter and celebrate. Ethan drove home in a daze. The city looked different somehow, like the colors were sharper, the possibilities wider. He kept expecting reality to reassert itself, for someone to call and say there had been a mistake. But his phone stayed quiet except for a text from Richard. Drinks tomorrow night to celebrate? The team wants to take you out. Maybe next week, Ethan replied. I have a date with my daughter tomorrow. That's even better, Richard sent back. Congratulations, man. You earned this. When Ethan pulled up to Mrs. Chen's house, Mia was already waiting on the porch, her backpack ready, bouncing with excitement. She launched herself at him the moment he stepped out of the car. You came! You came! He caught her, lifting her up and spinning her around. I said I would, didn't I? But you always say that, and then you have to work. The words stung because they were true. Not anymore, baby. Things are going to be different now. Because of your important work? Because Daddy got a new job, a really good job, which means more time with you and less time worrying about money. Mia's eyes went wide. Does that mean we can get a dog? Ethan laughed. Let's start with the zoo and work our way up to dogs, okay? Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, beaming. Look at you in that fancy suit. You look like a different person. I feel like a different person. Well, you better get used to it. That's who you are now. She handed him Mia's overnight bag. She was very good. We had fun. Thank you. Really? I couldn't have done any of this without you. Nonsense. You did it all yourself. I just kept her fed and happy. Mrs. Chen patted his arm. Now go enjoy your daughter. And Ethan, I'm proud of you. On the drive home, Mia chattered about everything she'd done with Mrs. Chen, about school, about the friend who had lost a tooth at lunch. Ethan let her words wash over him, the normalcy of it all grounding him after 3 days of chaos. Their apartment looked smaller than he remembered. The paint was still peeling in the corner of the living room. The couch still sagged in the middle, but it felt different now. Not like a trap, but like a starting point. Can we watch a movie? Mia asked, already pulling out her favorite DVD. Sure, baby, whatever you want. They curled up together on the saggy couch, Mia tucked under his arm. the animated movie playing on the small TV. Halfway through, she fell asleep against his chest, her breathing slow and steady. Ethan stroked her hair, watching her peaceful face. This was what it had all been for. Every double shift, every late night studying code, every humiliation and rejection, it had all been leading here. Tomorrow they'd go to the zoo. Next week, he'd start his new job. But right now, in this moment, he just held his daughter and let himself believe that maybe, finally, things were going to be okay. The zoo was everything Mia had dreamed of and more. She dragged Ethan from exhibit to exhibit, her face pressed against glass barriers as she watched elephants spray water and monkeys swing through artificial trees. Her cotton candy turned her lips blue, and she talked nonstop about every animal they saw. "Did you know elephants can remember things for their whole lives?" she said, tugging his hand toward the big cat enclosure. "Mrs. Patterson told us in science class, they never forget anything." "That's pretty amazing," Ethan said, letting her pull him along. "I wish I could remember everything. Then I wouldn't forget my math facts." She stopped suddenly in front of the tiger exhibit. "Daddy, look how big he is." A massive Bengal tiger paced behind the reinforced glass, its muscles rippling under orange and black stripes. Mia stood transfixed, her eyes wide. "He looks sad," she said quietly. "Why do you think that?" "Because he's in a cage. He should be running free." She pressed her palm against the glass. "Do you think he remembers being free?" The question hit Ethan harder than it should have. Maybe. Or maybe this is the only life he's ever known, and he doesn't know there's something different out there. Mia considered this seriously. "I think that would be even sadder, not knowing you could be free." They watched the tiger for a few more minutes before moving on. Ethan bought her a stuffed elephant from the gift shop, and she clutched it like treasure all the way home. By the time they got back to the apartment, she was yawning, exhausted from the day's excitement. "Best day ever," she mumbled as he tucked her into bed. "Yeah, baby, it really was." "Daddy?" Her voice was sleepy. "Are things going to be different now with your new job?" "Some things, yeah. I'll have to work during the day, but no more overnight shifts. No more weekends at the warehouse. I'll be home for dinner." "Every night?" "Most nights. I promise I'll try." She smiled, her eyes already closing. "That's good. I like it when you're home." Ethan sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out into sleep. Then he went to the living room and collapsed on the couch, the weight of the week finally catching up with him. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard. HR sent over the onboarding paperwork. Check your email. Also, heads up, Monday morning meeting with the full analytics team. Ms. Grant wants to introduce you officially. Ethan opened his laptop and found the HR email. Employment contract, benefits enrollment, direct deposit forms, non-disclosure agreements. He read through everything twice, half expecting to find a clause that said it was all a mistake. But it was real. All of it. He signed the documents electronically, his hand shaking slightly as he typed his name. When he hit submit, a confirmation message appeared. "Welcome to Meridian Strategic Consulting." That night, sleep came easily for the first time in weeks. Monday morning arrived too fast. Ethan woke at 6, showered, and put on the suit Richard had given him. It still felt like wearing someone else's skin, but he was getting used to the discomfort. He dropped Mia at school. A proper school now. Not just the daycare that stayed open until 7 p.m. She waved goodbye from the entrance, her new backpack bouncing as she ran to join her friends. The drive to Meridian felt surreal. He had an actual parking spot now, not the visitor spaces he'd used before. His name was already on the directory in the lobby. Ethan Cole, Senior Data Analyst. Senior. The word felt absurd. Jennifer from HR met him at reception. "Welcome officially. Let me get you set up with your access badge and show you to your office." Office? Ethan had assumed he'd get a cubicle at best. "Well, it's small, but it's yours." Ms. Grant insisted the Morrison lead analyst needed private space. Jennifer led him through the corridors to a corner office with glass walls and a view of the city. Inside was a desk, a computer setup with 3 monitors, and a bookshelf that was conspicuously empty. "This is..." Ethan couldn't finish the sentence. "Your space," Jennifer said cheerfully. "Computer is already configured with your credentials. You'll find your email active and access to all the Morrison files. The team meeting is at 9 in conference room A. Coffee is in the break room and your benefits package should be in your inbox. Any questions? About 1,000, but I'll figure them out. That's the spirit. Welcome aboard, Ethan. He sat at his desk after she left, staring at the 3 monitors. His reflection looked back at him from the dark screens, a man in a borrowed suit sitting in an office he hadn't earned through the normal channels. The computer login accepted his credentials on the first try. His email inbox already had 37 messages. Most were automated welcome messages and IT notifications, but 3 stood out. One from Ms. Grant. Team meeting at 9 a.m. Be prepared to discuss your role and the Morrison account. One from Dr. Chen. Welcome to the team. Stop by my office before the meeting. We need to talk. And one from an address he didn't recognize, with no subject line. The message was brief. Enjoy it while it lasts. Ethan stared at the anonymous message, his stomach tightening. Ms. Grant's warning about enemies echoed in his head. He deleted the email and tried to forget about it. Dr. Chen's office was 2 doors down from his. She was already there, surrounded by academic journals and technical papers stacked in precise towers. "Close the door," she said without looking up from her computer. Ethan did. "You wanted to see me? I wanted to give you a heads up before you walk into that meeting." She finally looked at him, her expression serious. "The analytics team is not happy about your promotion. Marcus has been quietly poisoning the well since Friday, suggesting you're Ms. Grant's pet project and that the Morrison success was luck. Was it luck? No, but that won't stop people from believing it if they want to." She stood, moving to the window. "Here's what you need to understand about Meridian's culture. We're a meritocracy on paper, but in practice there's a hierarchy based on credentials and tenure. You just skipped about 5 years of that hierarchy in 3 days. That makes people nervous. So what do I do? Don't apologize. Don't play small. You earned this position. Own it." She turned back to face him. "But also don't be an arrogant ass about it. The fastest way to make enemies is to act like you're better than everyone else." "I don't think I'm better than anyone." "Good. Remember that when Marcus tries to bait you in the meeting. He will, by the way. He'll ask technical questions designed to make you look incompetent in front of the team." "Should I be worried?" Dr. Chen smiled slightly. "Only if you actually are incompetent, which you're not. Just answer honestly and don't get defensive. The rest of the team will respect competence even if they resent your rapid promotion." The conference room was already full when Ethan arrived at 9. 12 analysts sat around the table, plus Dr. Chen, Richard, and Marcus. Ms. Grant stood at the head of the table, reviewing something on her tablet. Every conversation stopped when Ethan walked in. He felt a dozen pairs of eyes assessing him, judging. "Mr. Cole," Ms. Grant said, "please sit." The only empty chair was directly across from Marcus. Of course it was. "Let's begin," Ms. Grant said. "For those who haven't been following the Morrison situation closely, we had a critical model failure last week that threatened our largest client contract. Ethan Cole, who was interviewing for an analyst position at the time, identified the structural flaw and was given 72 hours to rebuild the model from scratch. He succeeded. Morrison has accepted the new model and renewed the contract. Polite but unenthusiastic applause rippled around the table. As a result, Ethan is joining Meridian as senior data analyst and lead on the Morrison account. He'll be working directly with their executive team on strategic modeling and market analysis." Ms. Grant's tone made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. "I expect everyone to bring him up to speed on our standard protocols and provide support as needed." Question. Marcus leaned forward. "What's the reporting structure? Does Ethan report to Dr. Chen, or is he operating independently?" "I report to Dr. Chen for technical oversight and to Richard for client relations," Ethan said before Ms. Grant could answer. "But I have direct responsibility for the Morrison model maintenance and updates." "And what's your background in chemical industry analysis?" Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just trying to understand how someone with warehouse logistics experience translates to Fortune 500 consulting." There it was, the first strike. "I don't have chemical industry experience," Ethan said evenly. "What I have is advanced statistical modeling expertise and the ability to identify patterns in complex datasets. The industry context is learnable, The analytical methodology is transferable. Interesting theory. Marcus pulled up something on his laptop. I was reviewing your model over the weekend. The machine learning component you built for R&D prediction, it's using a random forest algorithm, correct? Yes. Why random forest instead of gradient boosting? Gradient boosting typically provides better accuracy for this type of prediction. Ethan had expected this question. He'd asked himself the same thing while building the model. Random forests are more robust to overfitting and easier to interpret. Morrison's team needs to understand why the model makes specific predictions. Gradient boosting is a black box. Random forest lets me extract feature importance and explain the causal logic. A woman at the far end of the table, her nameplate read Jessica Lynn, spoke up. That's actually the right call. Client education is critical for model adoption. I've seen brilliant models fail because the client couldn't understand how they worked. Marcus didn't acknowledge her. And the ARIMA parameters, you used AR4. That seems aggressive for quarterly data. How did you determine lag order? Partial autocorrelation function analysis. The PACF showed significant correlation at lags 1 through 4, with a sharp cutoff after 4. I validated with AIC and BIC information criteria, which both confirmed AR4 as optimal. You did all this parameter testing in 72 hours? I did it in the first 12 hours. The rest of the time was spent on integration, validation, and scenario testing. Another analyst, a young man with thick glasses, raised his hand tentatively. Question for Ethan. The regulatory timeline component. That's really innovative. How did you think to integrate discrete event modeling with time series analysis? Chemical product approvals aren't continuous processes, Ethan explained. They're discrete events with variable timing. Trying to force them into a time series framework would introduce noise. So I modeled them separately and used the event outcomes as exogenous variables in the market projections. The young analyst nodded enthusiastically. That's brilliant. I've been working on pharmaceutical market models and struggling with the same issue. Could I pick your brain about implementation sometime? Sure. Anytime. Marcus's expression darkened. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. One successful model doesn't make someone an expert. Ethan, how do you plan to handle model maintenance? Morrison's market is dynamic. You'll need constant updates, recalibration, new scenario testing. I've built an automated monitoring system that tracks prediction error in real time. When error exceeds 5%, the system flags the need for recalibration. I've also scheduled quarterly manual reviews to catch issues the automated system might miss. And what happens when you're out sick or on vacation? Who maintains the model then? I'll document everything and train backup analysts. But realistically, I don't plan on being unavailable during critical periods. This is my account, my responsibility. Dr. Chen cut in. Marcus, these are good technical questions, but let's not turn this into an interrogation. Ethan has proven his competence. What he needs now is institutional knowledge and team support. I'm just trying to ensure quality standards, Marcus said smoothly. This firm's reputation depends on rigorous methodology. And our reputation was just saved by Ethan's rigorous methodology, Richard added. So maybe we focus on integration rather than skepticism. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, covering client updates, project timelines, and resource allocation. Ethan tried to absorb the flood of information, client names, project codes, internal deadlines. It was overwhelming. When Ms. Grant finally dismissed everyone, Ethan felt like he'd survived a gauntlet. Several analysts approached him afterward. Jessica Lynn shook his hand warmly. Don't let Marcus get to you, she said. He's been angling for senior analyst for 2 years. You just leapfrogged him, so he's bitter. I didn't mean to step on anyone's career. You didn't. You just did excellent work at exactly the right moment. That's not something to apologize for. She handed him her card. I mean it about collaboration. I think we could learn from each other. The young analyst with glasses, his name was David Park, also approached. That regulatory modeling approach is exactly what I need for my pharmaceutical project. Do you have time this week to discuss implementation? Sure. Just send me a meeting invite. As the room emptied, Marcus lingered. He approached Ethan with a smile that was pure venom wrapped in politeness. Welcome to the team, he said, extending his hand. Ethan shook it warily. Thanks. A word of advice from someone who's been here a while. Meridian rewards consistency, not flash. One big win is great, but it's sustaining that performance over years that builds a real career. His grip tightened slightly. And when you inevitably hit a rough patch, and you will, remember that the people you alienated on the way up are the ones who will be watching you fall. I haven't alienated anyone. Not yet, but you will. It's human nature. People don't like disruption, even when it's successful. Marcus released his hand. Just something to think about. He left before Ethan could respond. Dr. Chen appeared at Ethan's elbow. I told you he'd be a problem. He's just protecting his territory. He's actively planning to undermine you. Be careful. She checked her watch. You have a one-on-one with Richard in 15 minutes. Conference room C. Then this afternoon, I want to go over the Morrison model together. I need to understand your methodology well enough to back you up if questions arise. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, system training, and information overload. Richard walked him through client communication protocols, billing structures, and reporting requirements. Dr. Chen spent 3 hours dissecting his model, asking probing questions about every assumption and parameter choice. This is actually better than I initially thought, she admitted as they reviewed the code. The way you've structured the recalibration protocol, it's adaptive without being unstable. That's hard to achieve. I had a good teacher, Ethan said. The online course I took emphasized robust design over optimization. Sometimes a simpler model that doesn't break is better than a complex model that's fragile. Who taught the course? Professor Michael Chen from Berkeley. His lectures on time series analysis are all freely available. Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose. Michael Chen is my former dissertation advisor. Small world. Seriously? He's brilliant, also impossibly demanding. If you learned from his materials, you got a better education than most PhD students get in formal programs. She saved the code file they'd been reviewing. That explains a lot about your methodology. Michael doesn't tolerate sloppy thinking. Neither do you, from what I can tell. Touché. She stood, stretching. It's after 6. You should go home. Your daughter probably wants to see you. Ethan checked the time, surprised. The day had evaporated. Yeah, thanks for the review session. We'll do more tomorrow. I want you sitting in on the Hartman Industries pitch meeting. You should see how we present to prospective clients. The apartment felt like a sanctuary after the intensity of Meridian. Mia was at Mrs. Chen's, so Ethan picked her up and took her to the diner down the street for dinner. How was your new job? She asked around a mouthful of grilled cheese. Intense. Lots of new people to meet. Were they nice? Some of them, not so much. Like Emily Martinez at school. She's mean to everyone. Yeah, kind of like that. Ethan smiled. But I made some friends too, and my boss seems to trust me. That's good. Mia dipped her sandwich in ketchup thoughtfully. Mrs. Patterson says when people are mean, it's usually because they're scared or sad about something. Mrs. Patterson sounds smart. She is. She knows everything about science and animals and being nice to people. Mia took another bite. Do you think the mean people at your work are scared? Ethan considered the question seriously. Marcus's hostility, the anonymous email, the careful distance most of the team had kept. Maybe Mia's teacher was onto something. Maybe they are, he said. Scared that I'll take something from them, or that I'll make them look bad. But you won't, right? You're not a mean person. I'm trying not to be? Then they'll figure it out eventually. That's what Mrs. Patterson says. Give people time and they usually figure out the truth. They finished dinner and walked home through the cooling evening. Ethan helped Mia with her homework, simple addition problems that seemed impossibly easy compared to the complex models he'd been building. After she went to bed, he opened his laptop and checked his work email. 43 new messages since he'd left the office. Most were routine, but one from Morrison's CFO, Sarah Chen, stood out. Ethan, preliminary data from our agricultural division shows early signs of the demand increase your model predicted. Can we schedule a call this week to discuss production scaling decisions? Our board wants your input before committing resources. His input. Morrison's board wanted his input. Ethan typed a professional response scheduling a call for Thursday, then sat back and let the reality wash over him. He wasn't faking it anymore. This was real. People were making million-dollar decisions based on his analysis. The weight of that responsibility should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt right. Like he'd finally found the place where his particular combination of skills and desperation and stubbornness actually mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You don't belong there. Everyone knows it. It's only a matter of time." Ethan stared at the message, his jaw tightening. He should ignore it, should delete it and move on. Instead, he saved the number and marked the message as unread. Let them take their shots. He'd faced worse than anonymous threats. The second week at Meridian brought new challenges. Ethan sat in on client pitches, learning how the firm sold its services. He watched Richard work a room, saw how Ms. Grant commanded respect without raising her voice, observed Dr. Chen dismantle technical objections with surgical precision. He was learning to swim in deep water, and mostly he managed to keep his head above the surface. Thursday's call with Morrison went better than expected. Sarah Chen walked him through the agricultural division's preliminary numbers, which aligned almost perfectly with his model's predictions. "Your confidence intervals were spot on," she said. "We're seeing 11% growth so far, right in the middle of your projected range. The board is impressed. I'm glad the model is performing well. More than well. Thomas wants to expand the modeling to our European operations. Different regulatory environment, different competitive landscape, but the same underlying need for accurate market projections. Are you interested?" Ethan's pulse quickened. "Absolutely. I'd need to study the European market dynamics, but the methodology should translate." "Good. We'll discuss scope and timeline at next week's quarterly review." "But Ethan, this is rapidly becoming more than just a model maintenance contract. You're becoming a strategic partner. Make sure Meridian is prepared to support that level of engagement." After the call ended, Ethan sat in his office trying to process what had just happened. The Morrison account was growing. They wanted more. And they wanted him specifically, not just Meridian. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Heard you had a good call with Morrison," he said. "News travels fast." Sarah Chen copied Ms. Grant on the meeting notes. Grant forwarded them to the leadership team. Marcus stepped into the office uninvited. "European expansion. That's significant. It's an opportunity. It's also a risk. European chemical markets are more heavily regulated than domestic. More complex. More ways for a model to fail spectacularly." Marcus sat down across from Ethan. "I've worked on European accounts before. I could provide guidance, help you avoid rookie mistakes." Ethan studied him carefully. The offer sounded genuine, but the undercurrent felt wrong. "I appreciate that. I'll definitely consult the team as I develop the approach." "Not the team, me specifically. I have expertise you lack." Marcus leaned forward. "Here's the thing, Ethan. You got lucky with Morrison Domestic. Right place, right time, right insight. But luck runs out. When you're building models for markets you don't understand, with regulations you've never navigated, you need experienced guidance. And you want to provide that guidance. I want to ensure the firm's reputation isn't damaged by an analyst who's in over his head." Marcus's mask slipped slightly, showing the resentment beneath. "You may have impressed Ms. Grant with one flashy success, but sustainable performance requires depth you haven't demonstrated yet. I'm aware of my limitations." "Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're acting like you've got it all figured out. Taking calls with C-suite executives, making strategic recommendations, building your own little empire." Marcus stood. "Just remember that empires built on sand don't last. And when yours collapses, don't expect the people you ignored to catch you." He left before Ethan could respond. Ethan sat alone in his office, Marcus's words echoing in his head. Was he in over his head? Probably. Was he building on sand? Maybe. But what was the alternative? Back down, play small, defer to people who hadn't solved the problem when they had 6 months and all the credentials? His phone buzzed. Another anonymous text. "Morrison's CFO is setting you up to fail. European markets will expose you as a fraud." Ethan deleted it without responding. Whoever was sending these messages wanted him rattled, wanted him doubting himself. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. That evening, after putting Mia to bed, Ethan opened his laptop and started researching European chemical markets, regulatory frameworks, market structures, competitive landscapes. He downloaded reports, read academic papers, absorbed information like his career depended on it. Because it did. Around midnight, his phone rang. Miss Grant's name appeared on the screen. "I hope I'm not calling too late," she said. "I was working. What's up?" "I saw the Morrison meeting notes. European expansion is excellent news for the firm, but I want to make sure you're not overextending yourself." "I can handle it." "That's not what I asked. Can you handle it is different from should you handle it alone. Building European models while maintaining domestic operations and learning our internal systems, that's a lot for someone 2 weeks into the job." Ethan hesitated. Admitting limitation felt like weakness, but Ms. Grant's tone wasn't challenging, it was strategic. "I could use support," he admitted, "especially on European regulatory frameworks. That's not my strength." "Good. That's the right answer. I'll assign Jessica Lynn to work with you on regulatory analysis. She's done European projects before and she's already expressed interest in collaborating." Ms. Grant paused. "And Ethan? Marcus approached you today offering help. How did you? I have eyes everywhere. What did you tell him?" "That I'd consult the team as needed." "Smart. Don't accept one-on-one mentoring from Marcus. He's not interested in your success. He's looking for ways to claim credit or document failures. Work with Jessica, with Dr. Chen, with the team broadly, but keep Marcus at arm's length." "Understood. One more thing. The anonymous messages you've been receiving, report them to IT security. We have protocols for workplace harassment." Ethan's blood ran cold. "How do you know about those?" "Because they're not just targeting you. Someone is running a campaign to undermine your credibility. It is already tracking the source, but I need you to officially report them so we can take action." "Who's sending them?" "We don't know yet." "But we will." Ms. Grant's voice hardened. "Nobody sabotages my analysts and gets away with it. Forward the messages to IT. Let them handle it." After she hung up, Ethan sat in the dark living room staring at his phone. Someone at Meridian hated him enough to harass him anonymously. The same someone who probably knew about Morrison's European expansion before he did. The pieces were starting to form a picture he didn't like. He forwarded the anonymous messages to IT security as instructed, then went to bed. Sleep came reluctantly, his mind churning through scenarios and suspicions. Friday brought the quarterly Morrison review meeting. Thomas Morrison himself attended via video conference, along with Sarah Chen and 2 other executives. The Meridian team gathered in the main conference room: Ms. Grant, Richard, Dr. Chen, Jessica Lynn, and Ethan. Marcus was notably absent. "Let's begin with model performance," Thomas Morrison said without preamble. "Sarah, walk us through the numbers." Sarah shared her screen, showing actual market performance versus model predictions for the past quarter. The alignment was remarkable. The model had predicted 11 of 12 product line performances within 3% accuracy. "The agricultural demand spike was particularly impressive," Sarah said. "We scaled production based on Ethan's projections and captured significant market share from competitors who were caught flat-footed. That decision alone generated an additional $12 million in revenue this quarter." Thomas Morrison's expression remained neutral, but Ethan caught the slight nod of approval. "And the European expansion proposal?" Ethan took the lead, presenting his preliminary research on European market structures and modeling approaches. He acknowledged the gaps in his knowledge, identified where he needed support, and outlined a cautious timeline for model development. "I want to be clear," he said. "European markets are more complex than domestic. I'll need 3 months minimum to build a robust model, and that's with support from analysts who have European regulatory expertise." 3 months. Thomas considered this. That's longer than your domestic model took. The domestic model was built under crisis conditions with significant risk. I don't recommend that approach for European expansion. Better to do it right than do it fast. Sarah Chen smiled slightly. "That's refreshingly honest. Most consultants would promise the moon to land a bigger contract. I'd rather underpromise and overdeliver than the reverse." The meeting continued for another hour, discussing technical details, resource requirements, and success metrics. By the end, Morrison had approved an expanded contract for European modeling, with Jessica Lynn assigned as co-lead alongside Ethan. After the video call ended, Ms. Grant gathered the Meridian team. "Excellent work, everyone. Ethan, especially strong presentation. You're learning fast." She checked her watch. "Richard, Walk Ethan through the European contract terms. Jessica, start pulling your regulatory research. We kick off this project Monday. As people dispersed, Doctor, Chen pulled Ethan aside. That was well done, she said quietly. Admitting you need 3 months instead of promising quick results, that took courage. And it earned Morrison's respect. I just told the truth. Which is rarer than you'd think in consulting. Most people would rather overpromise and scramble than set realistic expectations. She glanced around, making sure they were alone. IT traced the anonymous messages. They came from a burner phone, but the timing and content suggest someone with internal knowledge of your projects. Marcus? Can't prove it yet, but the pattern fits. He's been vocal about his concerns regarding your rapid promotion, and he had access to the Morrison meeting schedules. Dr. Chen's expression hardened. If it is him, and we can prove it, he's done at this firm. Ms. Grant doesn't tolerate that kind of behavior. Ethan should have felt vindicated. Instead, he just felt tired. I didn't want to make an enemy out of him. You didn't make him your enemy. His own insecurity did that. She patted his shoulder. Focus on the work. Let HR and IT handle the politics. That weekend, Ethan tried to disconnect from Meridian's drama and focus on Mia. They went to the park, made cookies that turned out lopsided and delicious, and watched movies until she fell asleep on the couch. But his mind kept drifting back to the European project, to the anonymous threats, to the strange reality that he was now co-leading a multi-million-dollar international expansion. Sunday night, he got a call from Richard. Turn on the news, Richard said without greeting. Channel 7? Ethan grabbed the remote. The local business news was running a segment on Meridian Strategic Consulting. His stomach dropped as he recognized the conference room where they'd held the Morrison presentation. Unprecedented move by the prestigious consulting firm, the anchor was saying. Sources indicate that Meridian hired a warehouse worker with no college degree to rebuild a failed $20 million client model. The gamble apparently paid off, but raises questions about credential requirements in high-stakes consulting. The screen showed file footage of Meridian's building, then cut to an interview with someone Ethan didn't recognize, a business professor from the local university. This represents either visionary hiring or desperate risk-taking, the professor said. If the model succeeds long-term, it could revolutionize how firms think about credentials. If it fails, it will be a cautionary tale about abandoning professional standards. How the hell did this get out? Ethan demanded. Someone leaked it to the press, Richard said grimly. The story has enough accurate details that it had to come from inside the firm. Ms. Grant is furious. This makes me look like a publicity stunt. It makes Meridian look reckless, which is worse from the firm's perspective. Richard sighed. There's going to be fallout from this. Client calls, probably. Maybe reporters trying to interview you. Don't talk to anyone without clearing it through Ms. Grant first. After Richard hung up, Ethan sat staring at the TV as the segment ended. His face hadn't appeared on screen, but his story was now public. The warehouse worker who became a consultant. The unlikely success story that was either inspiring or irresponsible, depending on who you asked. His phone started buzzing with texts. Dr. Chen. Saw the news. Don't panic. This will blow over. Jessica Lin. Welcome to being famous. Sorry, that's probably not helpful. Hang in there. And one from the anonymous number that had been harassing him. Enjoy your 15 minutes. Everyone knows you're a fraud now. Ethan blocked the number and turned off his phone. Monday morning, Meridian's lobby was swarming with reporters. Ethan parked 3 blocks away and entered through the service entrance, following directions from a terse text Richard had sent at 6 a.m. The back corridors of Meridian were unfamiliar territory, all concrete and fluorescent lights instead of glass and steel. He felt like he was sneaking into his own workplace. Security let him through with a nod. Ms. Grant wants to see you immediately. Conference room A. The main floor was chaos controlled by force of will. Reporters clustered near the reception desk, held back by security but shouting questions at anyone who passed. Ethan caught fragments as he moved through the hallway. True that Meridian lowered hiring standards. Warehouse worker with no degree. $20 million gamble suit. Conference room A had its blinds drawn. Inside, Ms. Grant stood at the head of the table with Richard, Dr. Chen, and 3 people Ethan didn't recognize. Two men in expensive suits and a woman with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd won a lot of battles. "Ethan, meet our legal team," Ms. Grant said without preamble. "Sit down. We need to discuss damage control." The woman with gray hair spoke first. "I'm Patricia Lawson, Meridian's general counsel. The news coverage has created a legal exposure situation we need to address immediately." "Legal exposure?" Ethan's stomach dropped. "Did I do something wrong?" "You didn't. But someone at this firm leaked confidential client information to the press. That's a breach of contract and potentially actionable." Patricia slid a tablet across the table, showing the news segment. "This story contains details about the Morrison account that are protected by NDA. The reporter knew specifics about the model failure, the timeline, even your personal background." "How is that my fault?" "It's not. But you're the face of the story now, which means you're the target reporters will pursue. We need to establish boundaries and talking points immediately." She pulled up a document. "First, you do not speak to any media without explicit approval from this office. No interviews, no comments, no social media posts about your work here." "I don't even have social media." "Good. Keep it that way." Patricia moved to the next item. "Second, if reporters approach you directly, you say exactly this: 'I can't comment on client matters. Please contact Meridian's communications office.' Nothing else. Not even no comment, because that implies there's something to hide." Ms. Grant took over. "The firm is releasing a statement this morning emphasizing that hiring decisions are based on demonstrated competence, that your model has performed exceptionally, and that client confidentiality is paramount. We're not naming you specifically, but the press already knows who you are." "So what do I do?" "Your job. Exactly as you've been doing it." Ms. Grant's voice was steel. "The best response to critics is continued excellent performance. Morrison's quarterly results speak for themselves. The European expansion proves client confidence. Let the work defend itself." "What about whoever leaked this?" Ethan couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "They're still here, still sabotaging. It has identified 3 potential sources based on access to the information that was leaked," Patricia said. "We're conducting formal interviews today. If we can establish who contacted the reporter, that person will be terminated and possibly face legal action." One of the lawyers leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, I need to ask you directly. Have you had any contact with media about your employment here? Any conversations that might have been misconstrued or taken out of context?" "No, I haven't talked to anyone outside the firm about any of this." "Good. Maintain that position. If you're subpoenaed or formally questioned for any reason, contact this office immediately before responding." He slid a business card across the table. "My direct number is on there." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering contingency plans and communication protocols. By the time Ethan was dismissed, his head was spinning. Dr. Chen caught him in the hallway. "That was intense. You okay?" "I feel like I'm in the middle of something way bigger than just doing good work." "You are, unfortunately." She glanced back toward the conference room. "Legal is serious about finding the leak. My money's still on Marcus, but they won't confirm anything until they have proof." "Where is Marcus? I haven't seen him this morning." "He called in sick. Convenient timing." Dr. Chen checked her watch. "You have the European kickoff meeting with Jessica in 20 minutes. Try to focus on that. The legal stuff will resolve itself." Jessica was already in the small conference room when Ethan arrived, surrounded by printouts and reference materials. She looked up with a sympathetic smile. "Rough morning?" "You could say that." "Well, let's give you something productive to focus on. I pulled all my previous European regulatory research, framework comparisons, approval timelines, market entry barriers." She gestured to the stacks of paper. "It's a lot, but it'll give you the foundation we need." They spent the next 4 hours deep in analysis, blocking out the chaos beyond the conference room door. Jessica walked him through the nuances of European chemical regulations, how they differed by country, how EU-level policies interacted with national requirements, how Brexit had complicated everything for UK markets. "The challenge isn't just complexity," she explained, "it's variability. A product that gets approved in 6 months in Germany might take 18 months in France. Your model needs to account for that uncertainty without becoming so broad it's useless." Ethan scribbled notes, his mind already building the structural framework. We could use a Bayesian approach for the approval timelines. Prior probabilities based on product category and country, updated as new data comes in. That could work, but you'll need good historical data on approval decisions. Morrison must have that internally. They've been operating in Europe for decades. Jessica nodded. I'll reach out to Sarah Chen and see what they can provide. In the meantime, start building the baseline model structure. We can refine it once we have better data. Around 2 p.m., Richard knocked on the conference room door. His expression was grim. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Morrison's board saw the news coverage. Thomas wants a call immediately. Ethan's blood ran cold. They're pulling the contract. I don't know, but he specifically asked for you on the call. Conference room A, 5 minutes. The walk to conference room A felt like a death march. Miss Grant was already there, her face unreadable. The screen showed Thomas Morrison, Sarah Chen, and 3 other Morrison executives Ethan didn't recognize. Thomas, Ms. Grant said smoothly, thank you for making time on short notice. Let's skip the pleasantries, Olivia. Thomas's voice was clipped. My board spent the morning discussing a news report that portrayed our flagship consultant as an unqualified warehouse worker. Explain. The report contained unauthorized disclosures of confidential information. We're pursuing legal action against the source. As for Ethan's qualifications, I think his results speak for themselves. His results have been good so far, but my board is asking uncomfortable questions about due diligence, about why we're betting our European expansion on someone with no formal credentials or industry experience. Thomas leaned forward. So here's what I need. I need Ethan to explain directly to me why I should continue trusting him with multi-million-dollar strategic decisions. Ms. Grant started to respond, but Ethan cut her off. Because I'm the one who's going to lose sleep over this, he said. Every other analyst at Meridian has a safety net. Credentials, experience, other clients, other opportunities. I have this. Only this. If your European model fails, my career's over before it really started. That means I have more skin in this game than anyone else you could hire. Thomas's expression didn't change. That's fear talking, not competence. It's both. I'm terrified of failing you, but I'm also capable of delivering what you need. The domestic model proves that. The quarterly performance proves that. And the fact that I'm telling you I need 3 months instead of promising quick results proves I'm not going to overpromise just to keep the contract. Sarah Chen spoke up. Thomas, the agricultural demand prediction Ethan made has generated $12 million in additional revenue. That's not luck. That's sophisticated analysis. One prediction doesn't establish a track record. Then let me establish one. Ethan pulled up his laptop, connecting to the screen. I've been running the domestic model for 3 weeks now. Here are the rolling predictions versus actual results, updated daily. The screen filled with comparison charts. Predicted values in blue, actual outcomes in red. The lines tracked almost perfectly, with deviations rarely exceeding 3%. This is live data, Ethan continued, updated this morning. The model isn't just accurate on historical backtesting, it's performing in real time under real market conditions, with real money on the line. One of the Morrison executives Ethan didn't recognize, a man with a sharp nose and sharper eyes, leaned into frame. What's the model showing for next quarter, specifically for our industrial polymers division? Ethan navigated to the projection screen. Moderate headwinds in industrial polymers. The model predicts 4% decline in demand driven by automotive sector slowdown in the Midwest. But that's offset by growth in construction applications. Net result is roughly flat performance. Maybe 1% growth if construction holds steady. Our internal forecasts show 6% growth in industrial polymers, the executive said. Your model disagrees. Yes, sir. The internal forecasts might be accounting for planned marketing initiatives or new product launches. My model only sees historical patterns and current market signals. If you have strategic plans that aren't reflected in past data, the model won't predict them. So your model could be wrong. It could be, but the automotive slowdown is real. Production numbers are already declining. Construction is the wild card. If residential building stays strong, you'll hit that 6% growth. If it softens, you'll be closer to my projection. Thomas Morrison was silent for a long moment. Sarah, what's your read on construction trends? Mixed signals, permits are up, but mortgage rates are rising. Could go either way. She looked at the screen thoughtfully. I'm inclined to trust Ethan's conservative estimate over our optimistic internal forecast. Noted. Thomas turned his attention back to Ethan. Here's my position. The European expansion proceeds as planned, but I'm assigning one of our internal analysts to shadow your model development. David Chen will have full access to your methodology, your code, your assumptions. He'll be checking your work in real time. Ethan felt Ms. Grant tense beside him, but he nodded. That's fair. Transparency builds trust. It also protects both of us. If your model succeeds, David validates that success. If it fails, we have documentation of where things went wrong. Thomas's expression softened fractionally. I'm not trying to set you up to fail, Ethan, but I have a responsibility to my board and shareholders. This arrangement satisfies their concerns while still moving forward. I understand. I'll coordinate with David starting this week. Good. Sarah will handle the logistics. Thomas started to disconnect, then paused. And Ethan, stop reading the news coverage. It's noise. The only opinion that matters is whether your models work. Everything else is just people talking. The screen went dark. Ms. Grant let out a breath. That could have gone worse. He's putting a watchdog on me. He's protecting his position with his board while still supporting you. That's actually a win. She closed her laptop. David Chen is sharp but fair. He's not going to sabotage you. Just do your work and let him observe. If the model holds up, you'll convert a skeptic into an advocate. Richard nodded agreement. This is actually good news. Morrison could have pulled the contract entirely. Instead, they're doubling down with oversight. That means they believe in you, but need to manage their political exposure. Ethan wanted to believe them. But the weight of having someone watching his every move, documenting every decision, felt suffocating. The rest of the week was a blur of work and paranoia. David Chen from Morrison arrived Wednesday morning, a quiet man in his 40s with a PhD in economics and a notebook he filled with meticulous observations. He sat in on every meeting Ethan had, reviewed every line of code, asked probing questions about methodology and assumptions. He wasn't hostile, but he wasn't friendly either, just relentlessly thorough. Why Bayesian priors for the regulatory timeline instead of frequentist confidence intervals? David asked during one model review session. Because we're working with limited data and significant uncertainty. Bayesian methods let us incorporate expert judgment and update probabilities as new information arrives. Frequentist approaches would require more data than we have. What's your prior distribution based on? Historical approval timelines for similar chemical categories, weighted by country and regulatory regime. Jessica pulled data from the past decade of Morrison's European submissions. David made a note. And if the regulatory environment changes? New policies, new personnel at approval agencies? The model includes a volatility parameter that widens confidence intervals when we detect structural changes in approval patterns. It's not perfect, but it prevents overconfidence during transitional periods. More notes. David's face revealed nothing. By Friday, Ethan was exhausted from the constant scrutiny. Every decision felt like a test, every explanation like a defense. He understood the necessity, but it wore on him. Jessica noticed. You're wound tight, she said after David left for the day. He's not the enemy. He feels like the enemy. He's a skeptic doing his job, which is exactly what you'd do in his position. She started packing up her materials. The model is solid, Ethan. Let it speak for itself. That evening, Ethan picked up Mia from after-school care and took her to the park. She wanted to swing, so he pushed her while she shrieked with delight, her hair flying. Higher, Daddy! Higher! He pushed harder, watching her arc through the air, fearless and laughing. For a moment, the stress of Meridian felt distant. Daddy, are you happy? Mia asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? You look tired all the time now. You didn't used to look so tired. I'm okay, sweetheart, just working hard. But are you happy? Ethan slowed the swing to a stop. Mia turned to look at him, her expression serious beyond her years. I'm getting there, he said honestly. The new job is good, but it's also hard. People are watching me, waiting to see if I mess up. Like a test? Kind of like that. But you're good at tests. You helped me with my math test and I got all the answers right. She kicked her legs, starting the swing moving again. If you're good at something, the test isn't scary. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds, Ethan smiled despite himself. You're right. Thanks, baby. You're welcome. Can we get ice cream? Monday brought a breakthrough. David Chen had spent the weekend reviewing the complete European model framework, and he arrived at Meridian with his usual notebook and a slightly different expression. I have questions, he said, settling into Ethan's office. Of course you do. But first, I want to acknowledge something. This model architecture is more sophisticated than what I expected. The way you've integrated regulatory uncertainty with market dynamics, it's innovative. Ethan wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Thank you? Don't let it go to your head. I still have concerns about the implementation details. David opened his notebook. The Bayesian priors for approval timelines, you're using historical Morrison data exclusively. What about competitor data? Other firms must be navigating the same regulatory environment. We don't have access to competitor approval timelines. That's proprietary information. No, but you have access to public records of product launches and patent filings. You could reverse engineer approximate timelines based on when products hit the market versus when patents were filed. Ethan sat up straighter. That's brilliant. The timing gap between patent filing and market entry would give us a proxy for approval duration. It's noisy data, but it would expand your sample size significantly. More data means more robust priors. David was already sketching something in his notebook. I can pull the patent and launch databases for Morrison's competitor set, cross-reference them, clean up the obvious outliers. You do that? David looked up, something like surprise crossing his face. I'm here to help the model succeed, not sabotage it. Morrison's board wants this to work. They're just nervous about the risk. If I can strengthen the methodology, everyone wins. They spent the next 4 hours building the competitor analysis framework together. David's economic training complemented Ethan's statistical approach, and the combination produced insights neither would have reached alone. You're not what I expected, David admitted during a coffee break. What did you expect? Someone overconfident, defensive about criticism, protective of their methodology. He stirred sugar into his coffee. But you listen. When I suggest improvements, you actually consider them instead of defending your original approach. Why wouldn't I? You have expertise I lack. It would be stupid to ignore that. You'd be surprised how many consultants operate on ego instead of evidence. David took a sip. Thomas was right to bet on you. You've got the right instincts. The validation shouldn't have mattered as much as it did, but Ethan felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. By Wednesday, they had integrated the competitor data into the regulatory timeline model. The expanded dataset revealed patterns that Morrison's internal data alone had missed. Certain product categories consistently faced longer approvals in France, while Germany had streamlined processes for industrial applications. This is good work, Jessica said, reviewing their additions. The confidence intervals are tighter now, without sacrificing accuracy. That's exactly what we needed. David presented their progress to Morrison's board on Thursday via video conference. Ethan sat in on the call, watching David walk through the methodology enhancements with the same meticulous detail he'd used to interrogate Ethan's original approach. The integration of competitor data substantially improves predictive accuracy, David concluded. I'm confident this model will provide reliable projections for European market entry decisions. Thomas Morrison nodded slowly. And your overall assessment of the project? Should we proceed with full implementation? Yes, with the caveat that we continue quarterly reviews and model validation. But the foundational work is sound. David glanced at Ethan. Mr. Cole has built something genuinely innovative here. Morrison would be foolish not to leverage it. After the call ended, Ethan sat stunned. David had just given him a complete endorsement in front of Morrison's board. Don't look so shocked, David said, packing up his materials. I told you, I'm here to validate good work, not manufacture criticism. You delivered good work. I couldn't have done it without your input on the competitor analysis. Collaboration makes everything better. That's why Morrison sent me, not to catch you failing, but to strengthen your success. David extended his hand. I'll be back for the quarterly reviews, but the day-to-day oversight ends here. You've earned trust. Ethan shook his hand, feeling like he'd just passed the most important test of his career. That afternoon, Ms. Grant called an all-hands meeting for the analytics team. The conference room was packed, tension thick in the air. "I'm going to be direct," Ms. Grant said without preamble. 3 weeks ago, someone at this firm leaked confidential client information to the press. That leak damaged Meridian's reputation and created legal exposure for the firm. The room was silent. "Our legal team has completed their investigation. We've identified the source of the leak." Ms. Grant's expression was granite. "Marcus Webb is no longer employed by Meridian, effective immediately. He was terminated for breach of confidentiality and is facing potential legal action for violation of client NDAs." Ethan's stomach dropped. He'd suspected, but having it confirmed felt surreal. "I want to be clear about why this action was taken," Ms. Grant continued. "This firm tolerates healthy professional disagreement. We encourage debate about methodology and approach. What we do not tolerate is sabotage. Marcus didn't just leak information. He attempted to undermine a colleague's credibility for personal advancement. That behavior has no place here." Dr. Chen spoke up. "What happens to Marcus's client portfolio?" "His projects are being redistributed among the team. Jessica, you'll be taking lead on the Hartman account. David Park gets Wellington Industries. We'll have individual meetings to discuss assignments." Ms. Grant scanned the room. "I also want to address the elephant in the room. Ethan Cole's hiring was unconventional. Some of you questioned it. Some of you still question it. That's fine. But the results are undeniable. Morrison's contract was saved, their European expansion is proceeding, and client satisfaction is at an all-time high." She looked directly at Ethan. "Meridian succeeds because we pursue excellence, regardless of where we find it. Credentials matter, but they're not the only thing that matters. Competence, innovation, and integrity matter more. Remember that." The meeting dispersed slowly. Several analysts approached Ethan afterward, some offering congratulations, others just curious acknowledgement. The hostility that had characterized his first weeks was fading, replaced by cautious acceptance. Jessica hugged him spontaneously. "You survived. Against all odds, you actually survived." "Marcus tried to destroy me and I'm still here," Ethan said, the reality finally sinking in. "That's more than survival. That's victory. Own it." Dr. Chen approached with a rare smile. "Marcus's termination sends a message. You have institutional backing now. That changes everything." "Does it?" "It means you're not just the scrappy outsider anymore. You're a permanent part of this team, with all the support and expectations that entails." She clasped his shoulder. "Congratulations. And also, welcome to the pressure that comes with success." That evening, Ethan sat in his office after everyone else had left, looking out at the city lights. 3 weeks ago, he'd been fighting just to stay afloat, to prove he deserved a chance. Now Morrison's board had endorsed him, David Chen had validated his work, and his primary antagonist had been removed. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt the weight of what came next. The European model had to succeed. Morrison's expectations would only grow. The firm was betting on him now, not just giving him a chance, but actively supporting his approach. Failure wasn't an option anymore. His phone buzzed, a text from Mia's school. "Parent-teacher conference scheduled for next Tuesday, 4 p.m. Please confirm attendance." Ethan checked his calendar. Tuesday afternoon, he had a client call with Morrison's European operations team. He could move it, but that would mean rescheduling 3 executives across 2 time zones. He stared at the conflicting obligations, feeling the familiar pull. Work versus life, ambition versus presence. The same choice he'd been making, usually badly, for years. But Ms. Grant had said something in that first meeting that stuck with him. Success wasn't just about the work. It was about sustainability. He texted the school. "Confirmed. I'll be there." Then he sent a message to Sarah Chen at Morrison. "I need to reschedule Tuesday's call. Family commitment. Can we move to Wednesday morning?" The response came within minutes. "Of course. Family comes first. Wednesday works fine." Ethan sat back, surprised by how easy that had been. Maybe this new life could actually include room for Mia. Maybe he didn't have to sacrifice everything for success. His phone rang. Ms. Grant's name appeared on the screen. "I saw you rescheduled the Morrison call," she said. Ethan's stomach clenched. "I have a parent-teacher conference. I can move it if—" "Don't. I'm calling to say good. You're building something sustainable here, and that requires balance. Burnout serves no one. Her tone softened slightly. How's your daughter doing? She's good, happy, asking if we can get a dog. Ms. Grant laughed, the sound surprisingly warm. That's how you know life is stabilizing, when 7-year-olds start lobbying for pets. She paused. Ethan, you've proven yourself, multiple times over. Stop waiting for permission to succeed and just do it. The firm is behind you. Morrison is behind you. The only person who needs to believe in you now is you. After she hung up, Ethan sat in the dark office, her words echoing. Stop waiting for permission to succeed. He'd spent his entire adult life fighting for scraps, taking whatever opportunities he could grab, always feeling like he was one mistake away from losing everything. But that wasn't his reality anymore. He had leverage now, support, a platform to build from. The question was what he'd build with it. Ethan gathered his things and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures, new opportunities to prove himself. But tonight, he was just going to be Mia's dad, make her dinner, help with homework, and maybe start researching what kind of dog was good with kids. Because Ms. Grant was right. Success without balance wasn't really success at all. It was just a different kind of cage. And Ethan had spent enough of his life trapped. It was time to figure out what freedom actually looked like. The parent-teacher conference was in a small classroom that smelled like crayons and glue. Ethan sat in a chair designed for someone half his size, his knees awkwardly high, while Mrs. Patterson shuffled through papers covered in Mia's careful handwriting. Mr. Cole, thank you for making time, she said, settling into her own chair. I know you're busy with your new job. Mia comes first, always. Mrs. Patterson smiled. She talks about you constantly. How proud she is that you're doing important work now. She pulled out a drawing, stick figures labeled Me and Daddy, standing in front of what looked like a building. She drew this last week, said it's her visiting your office. Ethan's throat tightened. She hasn't actually seen my office yet. Then maybe you should show her. She's clearly imagining it. Mrs. Patterson set the drawing aside. But that's not why I asked you here. Mia's doing well academically. Excellent, actually. Her math scores have improved significantly since the beginning of the year. That's good to hear. But I've noticed she's been quieter lately, less engaged with her friends during recess. When I asked her about it, she said she worries about you working too hard. Mrs. Patterson's expression was gentle but direct. I'm not trying to tell you how to parent, but children absorb stress from their parents, even when we try to hide it. Ethan looked at the drawing again. The stick figure of himself was smiling, but Mia had drawn him inside the building, not outside with her. I've been stressed, he admitted. The new job has been intense, but I thought I was keeping it away from her. You probably are, mostly, but kids are perceptive. They notice when you're distracted, when you're tired, when you're carrying weight you won't talk about. She leaned forward. What Mia needs to know is that you're okay. Not perfect, not stress-free, but fundamentally okay. She needs to trust that your job isn't going to take you away from her. It won't. Then show her that. Bring her to your office. Let her see that this new world you're in has room for her too. Otherwise, it's just this scary thing that steals her dad's attention. Ethan sat with that on the drive home. He'd been so focused on succeeding at Meridian, on proving himself and securing their future, that he hadn't considered how it looked from Mia's perspective. To her, this new job was just another thing that made him tired and distant. That needed to change. He picked Mia up from Mrs. Chen's house, where she'd been waiting after school. She bounced into the car with her usual energy, chattering about a science project on plants. Mrs. Patterson says we're going to grow beans and measure them every day. Do we have beans at home? We can get some. Hey, Mia, how would you feel about visiting my office this Saturday? Seeing where Daddy works? Her eyes went wide. Really? I can come to your big important building? Really, I'll show you my office, and maybe we can get lunch afterward, just the two of us. Can I bring Elephant? She held up her stuffed animal from the zoo. Elephant can definitely come. That Saturday, Ethan dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of a suit. Meridian was mostly empty on weekends, just a few workaholics scattered across the floors. He led Mia through the lobby, her hand tight in his, her eyes enormous as she took in the glass and steel and modern art. It's so big, she whispered. Yeah, it is. Come on, my office is up here. The elevator ride felt different with Mia beside him, seeing everything through her perspective. When they reached his floor, she gasped at the view through the windows. You can see the whole city. Pretty cool, right? He unlocked his office door. This is where I work. Mia stepped inside carefully, like she was entering sacred space. She examined the 3 monitors, the bookshelf he'd slowly been filling, the photo of her he'd put on his desk. That's me! She pointed at the photo, delighted. Of course it is. I look at that picture every day when I'm working. Reminds me why I'm doing this. She climbed into his desk chair, spinning it around with a giggle. Then she stopped, her expression turning serious. Daddy? Are you happy here? It was the same question she'd asked at the park, but this time Ethan had a better answer. I'm getting there, baby. It's hard sometimes, and I have to work really hard. But yeah, I think I'm happy here, because it means I can give you a better life. I don't need a better life, I just need you. The simplicity of it hit him like a physical blow. Here he was, killing himself to provide opportunities and security, and what his daughter actually wanted was just his presence. How about both, he said. I keep this job that I'm good at, but I also make sure I'm home for dinner. And we do stuff together like going to the zoo, and maybe, eventually, we think about getting that dog you want. Mia's face lit up. Really? A dog? Not tomorrow, but soon. Once things settle down a bit more. She launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck. You're the best daddy ever. Ethan held her tight, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the weight and warmth of her small body. This was what mattered, not the models or the clients or the office politics. This. They got pizza for lunch at a place downtown that had arcade games. Mia played skee-ball and won enough tickets for a plastic bracelet she was absurdly proud of. They walked through a park, fed ducks at a pond, talked about nothing important. For the first time in months, Ethan felt like he could breathe. Monday brought the final presentation for Morrison's European model. 3 months had passed since that first crisis meeting, 3 months of building and testing and refining. The model was ready. The question was whether Morrison's board would accept it. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. Ethan spent the morning running final validations, checking every assumption and parameter one last time. Jessica sat beside him, equally nervous despite her years of experience. It's solid, she said for the 3rd time. Stop second-guessing. I just want to make sure it's perfect. Well, not perfect, but as good as it can be. At some point, you have to let go and trust the work. David Chen arrived at 1:30, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying his ever-present notebook. He'd flown in specifically for this presentation, and his presence felt both supportive and nerve-wracking. Ready? He asked Ethan. As I'll ever be. Good, because Thomas brought the entire board for this. 8 executives, all with opinions and questions. David's expression was encouraging despite the intimidating information. But they're fair. Just be honest about capabilities and limitations. The conference room filled quickly. Morrison's full board appeared on the video screen, Thomas in the center, Sarah Chen to his right, 6 other faces Ethan had never seen before. On the Meridian side, Ms. Grant, Richard, Dr. Chen, Jessica, and Ethan sat ready. Thomas opened without pleasantries. We're here to evaluate the European market model that Meridian has developed over the past 3 months. This represents a significant expansion of our consulting relationship, so we're approaching it with appropriate scrutiny. Ethan, the floor is yours. Ethan stood, connecting his laptop to the display. His hands were steady now, his mind clear. This was what he'd been building toward. 3 months ago, you asked us to develop a predictive model for Morrison Chemical's European operations. The challenge was complexity. 27 countries, different regulatory regimes, varied market dynamics, and limited historical data. He pulled up the first slide. What we've built is a multi-layered model that addresses each of these challenges systematically. He walked them through the architecture, the Bayesian framework for regulatory approvals, incorporating both Morrison's internal data and the competitor analysis David had suggested. The market demand projections using adapted ARIMA structures calibrated for European economic patterns. The competitive landscape modeling that accounted for both established players and emerging threats. The key innovation is adaptive uncertainty, Ethan explained. The model doesn't just give you predictions, it tells you how confident to be in those predictions based on data quality and market stability. When uncertainty is high, the confidence intervals widen automatically. You always know how much weight to give the projections. One of the board members, a woman with white hair and sharp eyes, spoke up. Show me a specific example. France, specialty chemicals, next 12 months. Ethan navigated to the France module. Specialty chemicals in France face moderate growth potential, 3 to 5% expansion, driven primarily by pharmaceutical demand. However, regulatory approval timelines are volatile. We've seen 18-month delays for some product categories. The model shows 70% confidence in the growth projection, which means there's meaningful uncertainty you should account for in strategic planning. What's driving the uncertainty? 2 factors. First, limited historical data on new regulatory personnel who started last year. We don't know yet how their approval patterns differ from predecessors. Second, political instability affecting regulatory budgets and staffing. The model flags both issues and widens confidence bands accordingly. So you're telling us what you don't know, not just what you think you know. Exactly. Overconfidence in predictions is more dangerous than uncertainty. We'd rather give you wider intervals you can trust than narrow predictions that might be wrong. The questions continued for 90 minutes. Technical challenges, implementation concerns, data requirements, updating protocols. Ethan and Jessica tag-teamed the responses, with David occasionally jumping in to validate methodology from Morrison's perspective. Finally, Thomas raised his hand. The room went silent. David, you've been embedded with this project for 3 months. What's your honest assessment? David stood, opening his notebook but not reading from it. When I started this assignment, I was skeptical. The domestic model's success could have been luck. The timeline was aggressive. The methodology was unconventional. He paused. But after 3 months of detailed review, I can say definitively that this is the most sophisticated market modeling system I've encountered in 20 years of industry experience. It's not perfect. No model is. But it's rigorous, transparent, and genuinely useful for strategic decision-making. You're recommending we implement it? I'm recommending you implement it and expand it. The framework Ethan and Jessica built could apply to Morrison's Asia-Pacific operations, to new market entry decisions, to M&A evaluation. This isn't just a European tool, it's a strategic asset. Thomas looked at Sarah. She nodded. Then he surveyed the rest of his board. One by one, they indicated agreement. All right, Thomas said. The board approves implementation of the European model. Sarah will work with Meridian on expanded contract terms for ongoing support and potential application to other markets. He looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Cole, you've exceeded expectations. Again, congratulations. After the video call ended, the Meridian team erupted in muted celebration. Richard shook Ethan's hand vigorously while Dr. Chen actually smiled. Jessica hugged both of them. Ms. Grant approached with her usual controlled expression, but Ethan caught satisfaction in her eyes. Well done. This is the kind of work that defines a firm's reputation. It was a team effort. Yes, but you led it. Own that. She glanced at the screen where Morrison's logo still displayed. David's comment about expanding the framework. That's your future here. Building systems that solve classes of problems, not just individual client needs. That's how analysts become partners. Partners. The word felt absurd and thrilling in equal measure. That evening, Ethan took Mia out for ice cream to celebrate. She got chocolate with rainbow sprinkles and told him about the bean plants that were starting to grow in her classroom. Mrs. Patterson says mine is the tallest so far. I measured it and it's already 2 inches. That's great, baby. You're going to be a scientist. Maybe. Or maybe I'll do what you do with the computers and the numbers. You can do whatever you want. That's the whole point of all this, giving you choices. Mia licked her ice cream thoughtfully. Daddy? Are we rich now? The question caught him off guard. We're doing okay. Better than we were. Why? Emily Martinez says her dad is rich because he has a big car and they go on vacations. We don't have a big car. No, we don't. But we have enough. Enough for a good apartment and good food, and eventually that dog we talked about. We're not rich like Emily's family, but we're not struggling anymore either. Is that why you work so hard? To have enough? Ethan set down his own ice cream, giving her his full attention. I work hard because I'm good at something important, and people need what I can do. The money is nice, but that's not why I do it. I do it because it matters, and because it gives us security, which means I don't have to worry about losing our home or not being able to take care of you. But you were taking care of me before, at the warehouse. I was, but I was always worried, always one emergency away from everything falling apart. Now I don't have to worry like that, and that's worth a lot. Mia nodded seriously. I'm glad you don't have to worry anymore. Me too, baby. Me too. The following week, Ms. Grant called Ethan into her office. He'd been there a few times now, but it still felt intimidating. All dark wood and leather, with awards and credentials lining the walls. Sit, she said, gesturing to a chair. We need to discuss your trajectory here. Is something wrong? On the contrary, Morrison is expanding their contract significantly. They want the model framework applied to Asia-Pacific markets, and they're asking for you specifically to lead the development. She pulled up something on her tablet. That's a 2-year project minimum, with significant revenue implications for the firm, which means we need to talk about your position. I thought I was already senior analyst. You are. But senior analyst is an individual contributor role. What Morrison needs, what the firm needs, is someone who can build and lead teams, someone who can train other analysts in these methodologies and scale the approach across clients. Ms. Grant looked at him directly. I'm promoting you to principal analyst, effective immediately. It comes with a team of 3 analysts who will report to you, a significant salary increase, and equity participation in the firm. Ethan's mind reeled. Principal analyst? I've been here 4 months. And you've generated more value in 4 months than some analysts do in 4 years. This isn't charity, Ethan. It's recognizing reality and positioning the firm to capitalize on it. She slid a folder across the desk. Review the offer. It's generous. If you have questions, we can discuss. But I need an answer by Friday. He opened the folder. The salary number made his vision blur slightly. The equity percentage was small but meaningful. The title came with responsibilities that felt enormous. What if I'm not ready? Nobody's ever ready for this kind of jump. You figure it out as you go, same as you've been doing. Ms. Grant's expression softened fractionally. I was younger than you when I made partner here. I had imposter syndrome for years, convinced someone would realize I didn't belong. But nobody knows what they're doing at first. You just have to be willing to learn and adapt. Who would report to me? Jessica Lynn, David Park, and we're hiring a 3rd analyst with European regulatory expertise. Jessica already respects you. David practically worships you. The new hire will be selected partly based on whether they can work with your style. She stood, signaling the meeting's end. Think about it, but don't overthink it. You've earned this. Ethan walked back to his office in a daze. Principal analyst. A team. Equity in the firm. 4 months ago, he'd been stacking boxes in a warehouse, and now he was being offered a partnership track at a major consulting firm. The imposter syndrome Ms. Grant mentioned was real and immediate. He still felt like he was faking his way through, waiting for someone to realize he didn't actually know what he was doing. But maybe that was normal. Maybe everyone felt that way. He called Mrs. Chen from his office, something he rarely did during work hours. Is everything okay? She answered with immediate concern. Everything's fine. Great, actually. I just got offered a major promotion. Ethan, that's wonderful. Tell me everything. He explained the offer, the new responsibilities, the salary that would fundamentally change their financial situation. Mrs. Chen listened with the patience of someone who'd known him through the worst times and understood what this meant. I'm proud of you, she said when he finished. You've worked so hard for this. I'm terrified I'll screw it up. Of course you are. That means you're taking it seriously. She paused. But let me ask you something. When you built that first model for Morrison, were you confident you could do it? No, I was terrified. And did you do it anyway? Yes. Then you already know how to handle being scared and doing it anyway. This is just the next version of that. Her voice warmed. Accept the promotion, Ethan. You've earned it, and Mia and I will be here cheering you on. He thanked her and hung up, staring at the offer letter. Mrs. Chen was right. Fear wasn't a reason to say no. It was just information, a signal that something mattered, and this mattered. Friday morning, he walked into Ms. Grant's office and accepted the promotion. The announcement went out firm-wide that afternoon. Ethan braced for resentment, for pushback from analysts who'd been at Meridian longer. But the response was mostly positive. Jessica sent an enthusiastic email about working together officially. David Park stopped by his office with congratulations. Even analysts he barely knew offered polite acknowledgement. The culture had shifted. He wasn't the scrappy outsider anymore. He was part of the firm's leadership, and people accepted that. Dr. Chen found him late Friday afternoon, sitting in his office reviewing team structure proposals. "I heard the news. Congratulations." She sat across from him. "How does it feel?" "Surreal. Like I'm waiting for someone to realize it's a mistake." "That feeling doesn't go away. You just get better at ignoring it." She smiled. "I remember when I made senior analyst, I was convinced my PhD was the only thing keeping me employed, that without those letters after my name, I'd be exposed as inadequate. But you're brilliant. Everyone knows that." "Now they do. Back then, I was just another nervous analyst trying to prove herself." She leaned back. "Here's what I learned. Credentials open doors, but competence keeps them open. You've demonstrated competence repeatedly. Trust that." "What if I can't build and lead a team? That's different from individual work." "Then you'll learn. Same as you learned statistical modeling, client management, and corporate politics." Dr. Chen's expression turned serious. "But here's the real question. Do you want this? Not the salary or the title, but the actual work of building methodologies and developing people. Because that's what this role is." Ethan thought about it. Teaching David Park his regulatory modeling approach had been satisfying in a way individual work wasn't. Watching Jessica's confidence grow as they collaborated on European markets had felt meaningful. The idea of building a team that could tackle bigger problems, create frameworks that lasted beyond any individual project, that appealed to something deep. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do want it." "Good. Then you'll be fine." She stood. "One more piece of advice. Don't try to do everything yourself. That's the hardest transition for individual contributors. Learning to delegate, to trust your team. You hired smart people. Let them be smart." 2 weeks later, Ethan's team was assembled. Jessica and David were official reports, and the new hire, a woman named Catherine Ross with a PhD in European economics and 5 years at a competitor firm, brought expertise that filled gaps in their collective knowledge. Their first team meeting was awkward. Ethan sat at the head of the small conference table, feeling absurdly young and underqualified to be leading people who had credentials he lacked. "So," he started, then stopped. "I'm not entirely sure how to do this. I've never managed people before." Jessica laughed. "That's refreshingly honest. But here's what I know. We're building something that matters. Morrison's expansion is just the beginning. Ms. Grant wants us developing frameworks that can apply across clients and industries. That's a huge opportunity and a huge responsibility." David leaned forward. "What's the vision? Where are we going with this?" "Honestly, I don't have a complete vision yet. I know we're good at building adaptive models for complex markets. I know clients value transparency about uncertainty. Beyond that, I think we figure it out together." Ethan looked at each of them. "I'm good at statistical modeling and problem solving. Jessica, you're better at regulatory frameworks and client communication. David, you understand academic rigor and validation. Catherine, you bring European market expertise none of us have. We're stronger together than any of us are individually." Catherine spoke for the first time, her accent carrying traces of time spent in London. "That's a collaborative approach. Most teams I've worked on had clear hierarchies and decision-making structures. We'll have structure when we need it. But I'd rather start with collaboration and adjust than impose hierarchy that stifles input." Ethan spread his hands. "Look, I got here through unconventional means. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. What I have is willingness to learn and a track record of solving hard problems. If that's enough for you, let's build something together. If you need a traditional manager, this might not be the right fit." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Jessica smiled. "I'm in. This sounds way more interesting than traditional consulting." David nodded agreement. "Same. I've done the traditional route. It's boring." Catherine studied Ethan carefully. "I left my previous firm because the leadership was rigid and dismissive of new ideas. If you're serious about collaboration, I'm very interested." "I'm serious." "Then let's build something." The Morrison Asia-Pacific project consumed the next 8 months. Ethan's team worked alongside Morrison's regional executives. adapting the European framework to markets as diverse as Japan, Australia, and India. The challenges were immense: different regulatory systems, different competitive landscapes, different cultural approaches to business. But the team worked. Jessica's communication skills smoothed client relationships. David's analytical rigor caught errors before they became problems. Catherine's international experience navigated cultural nuances Ethan would have missed. And Ethan's ability to synthesize complex systems into workable models tied it all together. They fought sometimes. Catherine and David had a spectacular argument about Bayesian versus frequentist approaches that lasted 2 hours before Ethan intervened and forced them to test both methods empirically. Jessica occasionally got frustrated with Ethan's tendency to rebuild models from scratch instead of iterating. Ethan had to learn when to let go and trust his team's judgment instead of controlling every detail. But they learned. Individually and collectively, they got better. 8 months in, they presented the complete Asia-Pacific framework to Morrison's global board. 20 executives across 4 time zones watched as Ethan's team walked through models that predicted market dynamics in 17 countries with documented accuracy rates above 90%. Thomas Morrison, now clearly supportive rather than skeptical, asked the final question. What's next? You've built frameworks for domestic, European, and Asia-Pacific markets. Where does this go from here? Ethan glanced at his team, then back at the screen. We think this methodology can expand beyond chemicals. The core principles, adaptive uncertainty, regulatory modeling, competitive landscape analysis, apply to any complex market. Pharmaceuticals, technology, energy, financial services. We're ready to test that theory if you're willing to be the pilot case. Thomas smiled. Send us a proposal. If it's as good as what you've delivered so far, we'll consider it. After the call, Ethan's team celebrated with expensive champagne Richard had brought. Ms. Grant appeared with a rare smile. Pharmaceutical modeling, she said. That's ambitious. It's the logical next step. The framework is there. We just need to adapt it. Morrison isn't the only client who'd want this. If we can crack pharmaceutical markets, we could pitch this across our entire healthcare portfolio. Ms. Grant raised her glass. To the team that keeps expanding what's possible. They drank to that. A year after that first crisis presentation, Ethan found himself in a familiar conference room with an unfamiliar situation. Across the table sat 3 candidates interviewing for an analyst position on his team. All 3 had impressive credentials, degrees from top schools, experience at major firms, exactly the background Meridian traditionally valued. But Ethan wasn't looking at credentials. He was looking for something harder to quantify. The first candidate was smooth and polished, giving practiced answers to every question. The second was technically brilliant, but dismissive when Ethan asked about collaboration. The third was nervous, stumbling over words, but her eyes lit up when she talked about a forecasting model she'd built in grad school using limited data and creative methodology. After the interviews, Jessica and David joined him to discuss. Candidate 1 is the safest choice, Jessica said. She'd fit in immediately. Candidate 2 has the strongest technical background, David added, published in major journals, speaking at conferences. And candidate 3? Ethan asked. Jessica hesitated. She's raw, needs development, but there's something there. Yeah, there is. Ethan thought about himself a year ago, walking into an interview he had no business being in with credentials that didn't match the requirements. She reminds me of someone. David grinned. Of you? Maybe. She's hungry. She's creative. She's willing to admit what she doesn't know. Ethan made a decision. We hire candidate 3. With mentorship and support, she'll outperform the others. Ms. Grant might push back, Jessica warned. She's the least credentialed. Then I'll explain my reasoning. Credentials matter, but they're not everything. Sometimes potential matters more. He made the case to Ms. Grant that afternoon. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. You're advocating for the risky choice, she said finally. I'm advocating for the right choice. Candidate 3 has drive and creativity. The others have polish and credentials. I'll take drive over polish every time. Ms. Grant smiled. You know what you're doing. Hire her. But she's your responsibility to develop. Understood. That evening, Ethan picked Mia up from school. She was 8 now, taller, losing the baby roundness in her face. They had a new apartment, bigger, in a better neighborhood. And they had a dog, a goofy golden retriever named Chester that Mia adored. "How was school?" he asked as she climbed into the car. "Good. We started learning multiplication. It's kind of hard, but also kind of fun." Math is always a little of both. They drove home through familiar streets that felt different now. The warehouse where he used to work was still there, but Ethan barely glanced at it. That life felt distant, like something that happened to someone else. At home, Chester greeted them with enthusiastic tail wagging. Mia immediately started her homework at the kitchen table while Ethan made dinner, something he actually had time for now. Chicken and vegetables, nothing fancy, but made with attention and care. "Daddy?" Mia said without looking up from her math worksheet. "Are you happy?" The same question she'd asked a year ago, but this time Ethan knew the answer immediately. "Yeah, baby, I really am." "Good. Me too." She erased something, rewrote it. "I'm glad we got Chester, and I'm glad you're home for dinner now." "Me too on both counts." After dinner, after homework, after Mia went to bed with Chester curled at her feet, Ethan sat on the couch with a glass of wine and his laptop. He had work to review, always had work to review, but it didn't feel like drowning anymore. It felt manageable, purposeful. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "Morrison just referred us to 3 new clients. All want the market modeling framework. Your team might need to expand again." Ethan smiled and typed back, "Good. We're ready." He set the phone down and looked around his living room. Not lavish, but comfortable. Safe. Theirs. 18 months ago, he'd been a warehouse worker with no prospects, raising a daughter alone, fighting every day just to keep them afloat. People had looked at him and seen someone who didn't belong, someone without the right credentials or background. They'd been wrong. Not because credentials didn't matter, but because they weren't the only thing that mattered. Competence mattered. Creativity mattered. The willingness to work harder than anyone else because you had no safety net, that mattered too. Ethan had learned something important through all of this. Success wasn't about being perfect or fitting someone else's definition of qualified. It was about being honest about what you could do, working relentlessly to get better, and having the courage to take opportunities even when you weren't sure you were ready. He'd also learned that success without balance was just another kind of failure. The job mattered, but Mia mattered more. Building a career was important, but building a life was essential. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Meridian to find the new analyst, Sarah Kim, the candidate he'd chosen, waiting nervously in the lobby. It was her first day, and she looked exactly how he'd felt 18 months ago. Out of place, uncertain, determined. "Welcome to the team," he said, extending his hand. "Let me show you where we work." As they walked through the corridors, Sarah asked hesitant questions about the projects, the clients, the expectations. Ethan answered honestly, remembering how much he'd valued honesty over polish when he was starting out. "I'm not going to lie," he told her as they reached his office. "This job is hard. The expectations are high. You'll be challenged constantly, and sometimes you'll feel like you're in over your head." "That's terrifying." "It is. But here's the thing. Being in over your head is where growth happens. You'll have support from me, from the team, from the firm. We're not going to throw you in alone, but we are going to push you to be better than you think you can be." Sarah nodded, her nervousness mixing with something that looked like excitement. "I'm ready for that. I think." "You are. I can tell." Ethan gestured to the office next to his. "That's your space. Get settled, and we'll start with introductions to the team this afternoon." He left her to organize her new office and returned to his own desk. Through the glass walls, he could see the city spreading out below, full of possibility and challenge and opportunity. Somewhere in that city, there was probably another person like he'd been. Struggling, working jobs that didn't match their potential, wondering if they'd ever get a real chance. Ethan couldn't help all of them, but he could help Sarah. He could build a team that valued competence over credentials. He could prove over and over that unconventional paths could lead to extraordinary outcomes. That was his responsibility now. Not just to succeed himself, but to create space for others to succeed too. His phone buzzed with a reminder. Parent-teacher conference with Mia's new teacher in 2 hours. Ethan glanced at his calendar, saw the Morrison call he'd scheduled for that time, and didn't hesitate. He moved the call. Some things were negotiable. Others weren't. He gathered his materials and headed out, passing the conference room where it had all started. The room where he'd been rejected, where he'd noticed a pattern no one else saw, where he'd taken a gamble that changed everything. The room was empty now, waiting for the next crisis, the next opportunity, the next person who'd walk in not knowing they were about to change their life. Ethan smiled and kept walking. He had a daughter to check in on and a future to keep building. One decision at a time, one day at a time, proving that sometimes the people who don't fit the mold are exactly the ones who break it open for everyone else. That afternoon, sitting in another too-small chair in another elementary school classroom, listening to Mia's teacher praise her work ethic and curiosity, Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Not contentment exactly, he was too driven for that, but satisfaction. The bone-deep knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The warehouse worker had become a consultant. The outsider had become a leader. The desperate gamble had become a sustainable career. But more importantly, the father who'd been drowning was now present. The man who'd been fighting just to survive was now building something that mattered. That was the real victory. Not the title or the salary or the success, but the life he'd built around it. A life that had room for both ambition and love, for both achievement and presence. Ethan walked out of that school holding Mia's hand, Chester waiting in the car, a team waiting at the office, a future stretching out ahead of him full of challenges and possibilities. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, he wasn't afraid of any of it. He was ready.